You're back.
I'm back. Woo! That was really loud. Okay, here's my video. Okay.
There we go.
Are we online?
Yes. Right?
Cool. Sounds good. Yeah.
Okay.
A little bit of a lag between YouTube and here, but we should be back. Did you start telling people about all the things?
I did. Yes. I only talked about us trying not to cuss. So.
Oh. Cool.
Other than that, it was just me sitting here. So probably not very fun.
I'm sure it was fabulous. Well, welcome everybody. We finally got technical difficulties worked out, so let us know in the chat if anything else comes up. But hopefully we're good to go now. And yeah, thanks everybody for coming, and thanks Gestalt. And do you want to do a bit of an intro?
Yeah.
Okay.
Should we say who we are?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Some people might know that, huh? Might not know that, huh? I'm Brandy Jessup.
I'm Callie Nissen. And we've been best friends for over 10 years.
Yep. Almost 15. It's weird.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And
but we were going to have a show at Gestalt that would actually be an actual show, but because of COVID-19, we were not able to do that. So we decided to put everything online. And we thought it would be a wonderful opportunity to do a live artist talk.
Yeah. So we're super excited to be here and to finally be showing together. I think this is actually the first show we've done together, except for like the 4x4 shows at Northwest.
Yeah.
So we're super stoked. It's gonna be awesome. And one of these days we'll do one in person, but for now you can check out the show on the Gestalt website, and we're gonna kind of talk through our background and the show and our work, and then we're gonna do some demos. It's gonna be awesome.
Yeah, just kind of working on stuff that, and later on we'll be doing demos through Gestalt's Instagram. So kind of what we're working on now during this video, we'll probably kind of either continue on or maybe just do something different, but should be pretty fun.
Yeah, super excited. So yeah, did we say we met at Northwest College in Powell, Wyoming? For any of you who are not watching us from the Gestalt community, Cal grew up in Powell and I grew up in Grable, which is right down the road. And we met in our first ceramics class 13, 14 years ago at Northwest. And we're both super shy and sat at the table in the back and barely talked, and connected over a band that we both love, which is where we pulled the name of the show, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But have been friends ever since and started making work. And since we've left school, Gestalt has become a thing, and we're super excited that Erin is letting us do this. And we want to give a big shout out to all of the community art centers, whether you're in Powell or not, but Gestalt is an amazing resource, and Callie's taught a lot there, so she can talk more about that.
Well, just long time ago, but yeah, it's a great space. But yeah, so our first class together was with Elaine DeBure, who we both have, I think, well, she's my mentor, your mentor. We've worked with Elaine for a long time. She's a really wonderful woman. And I think that in her class, we really kind of felt comfortable, and then we slowly became friends, but really we became really good friends when we went to Spain. So we were able to go to Spain with Ann Toner, who's another professor at Northwest College. And it was a really wonderful opportunity. But yeah, and then I think that summer we came back home, and I think we both talked about how much we loved Chris Thiele, and then heard that he was in a new band called the Punch Brothers, and we got really excited, and then we've been best friends ever since.
Yep, that's good. And Yeah, so the show is named after one of our favorite Punch Brothers songs. This song is Familiarity, and the line from it is, and you can sing together when, and that felt very poignant for the times. And it's been really hard on everybody to lose these communities like Gestalt and other community art centers around the country, and restaurants and coffee shops and all the places where we meet and we develop these friendships and where we develop our art and get to bounce ideas off of people. So we're super excited to be able to continue to support the community while we're online and while we're all quarantining, and to bring some art to you guys in your homes. And so we talked a little bit about what Gestalt does for the community. They're an amazing space. If you're not from Powell and you get the chance, definitely stop by there. They have an awesome little coffee shop, fabulous studios. You can rent little pull down studios, but then there's also like a big open space where there's community events. Several times a week, you can go in and just paint. They have Dungeons and Dragons minis painting, which I love because I've recently gotten into this. I'm painting some minis right now. They have bands there all the time. They are the best art supply store in town by far. They're amazing, and we're probably in the county. And when Cal and I were at Northwest, that didn't exist. So we're super stoked for all the students who get their work there now. And they have a frame shop. They have visiting artists who come in often and will teach workshops. And the town of Powell is super lucky to have a community like this where we can all get together and be creative and support each other in our work. So we're really grateful to get to help out.
I couldn't, if you had told me back when we were at Northwest that there would be such a great art center, art store, place to show your work or anything like that, I wouldn't have believed you that it would be in my hometown, because I remember us having to travel to find different kind of things like this. And so having a wonderful art center like this in a town like Powell, it's really important.
For sure.
And important that we remember them in this time as well. But yeah.
And not just Gestalt, but other small businesses, like however we're able to support. So with that in mind, Cal and I both decided, I don't know if Erin, you saw this or not, but Cal and I both decided that all of the work, usually we would give a small commission to Gestalt, but all of the work that's for sale in the store throughout the month is going to be in all of the work that's for sale in our show, not in the store. Erin, I'm not going to do this to you. Everything. No, everything that is for sale in Together When Callie and I show, is the proceeds are going to be split 50-50. Half are going to Gestalt to support their programs while they're not as open to the public and not able to do some of these programs. That'll go there, and then the other half is going to go to Partners in Health, which is an organization that I work with for my job, and they have a COVID relief fund, and so we'll be supporting them. And the portion of Partners in Health that I work directly with through some of the charity work that my job does is we are working to radically reduce maternal mortality rates in Sierra Leone, which is the poorest country in the world and the highest maternal mortality rate. So my portion of things will be going that way, but they're doing a lot for COVID relief, both abroad and at home. They're really leading the charge with trying to help governors get effective testing and tracing. And so it's a great organization. There's lots of great organizations. And if you can help out at all, like that's where the money from the art is going this time. If you can't, that's okay too. Don't put yourself in any sort of financial risk if you can't. It's totally cool.
We'd also like to donate another piece of artwork that we'll be working on tonight and during our demos. And we're kind of thinking that maybe we could have an auction for those pieces. And again, all those proceeds will go to Gestalt as well. So I'll be working on a drawing, a larger drawing than what's in the show. And Brandy, you'll be working on a ceramic piece. So keep an eye out for that and pay attention. on Facebook and Instagram, and we'll let you know, but we will be making more work to auction off.
Yeah, it's gonna be super fun.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think we got some people here at 6:15. So I guess we should probably jump into some of the work, talk about our kind of artistic journeys and how we got here and what we make and why.
Yeah, we kind of talked about how we thought it'd be nice. In an artist talk, I really like to hear about people's education, and maybe not just school education, but different jobs that they had leading up to kind of the work that's in the show, or what they're doing, you know, currently in their with their work, or in different things. So I kind of thought it would be interesting for us to talk about our education background. So kind of how we got here, and then go into our artwork. And I think I'm going to try to kind of show my artwork on my screen. So I might kind of jump from here to my website or here to Gestalt's website and show artwork, and hopefully that will work. But yeah, who should go first?
You go first. We discussed this.
Oh yeah.
Let me get my coat.
Okay, so okay. Okay, so I'll start. Should we do what we said, like do education, and then you talk about your education, then I'll do artwork, you talk about artwork?
Sure.
Okay.
Rip it and rip it.
So yeah. So as we talked about before, Randy and I both started our education at Northwest College. Northwest College, for those of you who aren't from the area, it's a really, really wonderful small community college in Powell, Wyoming. Community colleges are vital for Wyoming because we are so kind of isolated and desolate. There's not a lot of population. So the community colleges in Wyoming are really, really good. And so that's where we worked with Elaine DeVere, who both got us kind of the bug for clay. Also Ann Toner, who took us on awesome trips across the country and to Spain and to Italy. And then John Gerizzo, who I might talk a little bit about when I talk about my artwork, because I'm kind of going back to drawing again. And I can't go back to drawing without thinking about John Gerizzo, who was the drawing instructor at Northwest College. So I transferred to the University of Wyoming, and I thought that I would continue with ceramics, but I got down there and I met Mark Ritchie, who I adore. And I had already kind of liked printmaking, but then kind of liking printmaking, and then working with Mark Ritchie and having him as an instructor just made me really, really love the medium. So I never really kind of looked back since. So, and UW was again, another really good school. I was there when they went from having classes in these teeny tiny little, they called them like, what did we call them? The barracks. And they were these old buildings that they were student housing, and they were only supposed to last a few years, but they kept them up. And so we went from this teeny tiny little space to a huge new building. So everybody's work went from this big to as big as we can make it. And it was super fun. But that's kind of when I decided that I wanted to go to grad school, and I wanted to go to grad school for printmaking. So I took some time off in between undergrad and grad school, and I taught in Eastern Montana, where I would travel to one classroom schools. Sorry, something just popped up on my screen. I would travel to one classroom schools across Eastern Montana and teach art to K through 12. And these were teeny tiny schools. I had one school had 2 kids. I think the largest one classroom school had about 15 kids. But I would travel all over in a van named Van Gogh. And during this time, I really thought about what I wanted to do, and that it was really important to me that I got as much education as I could. So I applied to 5 different schools, and I didn't get into any of them, which happens. And I think I called Mark Ritchie, who I worked with, like I said. I think I was crying, and I didn't know what to do. And he was like, well, I'm at the University of Dallas, and you should come down here. And he's like, I'll put you on the phone with Stephen Fouch tomorrow. And so he put me on the phone with Stephen Fouch, who's the professor at University of Dallas. And I was like, I think I'll go there. So I ended up leaving rural Montana, grew up in rural Wyoming, and ended up going to grad school in a very, very urban environment. And I'll talk about this later and how much that affected me in my artwork, which is kind of cool. And actually now, I was thinking about it today, now leaving that urban environment and coming back to a rural area, now that's kind of affecting me in a different way, making me think differently about my artwork. But the University of Dallas, I think, was the best decision I could have ever made. It's a really, really strong school. There's only 5 faculty. And so how they do it with their grad program is all 5 faculty are on your committee. And I really lucked out because they were amazing. Stephen was a really, really wonderful professor and kind of helped me figure out what artwork I wanted to make and how I wanted to make it. And the rest of the faculty kind of shared in that too. So it was a really wonderful environment. But yeah, we also had to have our MFA in Dallas. And so you'll see when I talk about my artwork, kind of obsessed with birds and wildlife and the landscape. And so I ended up having my Master of Fine Arts degree thesis exhibition at the Trinity River Audubon, so that it was a bird sanctuary and I could make artwork about birds and nature and everything. And now I'm back in Cody, Wyoming, and I'm working at Calico Foundry, and I'm having a blast and I'm happy to be home for a little bit. But yeah, that's my education background.
It was fun. I got to go down and see Dallas one time while she was there. 2 times, actually. I helped install the MFA show, and it was the coolest space. And it was so interesting to see the school is a little bit outside of the city, so it feels a little rural. But then to get to the place where the show was, we went right through downtown Dallas, and like you could get from the Audubon to bars downtown in a few minutes, and to like see those 2 worlds kind of right on top of each other was so interesting, and it was fabulous.
Yeah. And that was I kind of feel like that's such a University of Dallas feeling and a Dallas feeling as well, because the University of Dallas, like to get to the art department, I would walk from my apartment across campus, and I'd kind of walk on this, a hill. It's a hill, like Dallas is flat, right? But you can kind of see the skyline, and you can just see this it's just urban environment forever. And then as I'm walking to the art department is down this hill, and you go through the woods. And so you're just kind of like, you go from this very urban environment into nature, and then into what we call the art village. And just, I also want to kind of talk about really quickly, just some of the other professors other than Stephen Fouch, who was very influential in my artwork, but also Kelly O'Brien, who's the ceramics professor, was really helpful in guiding me, as well as some people who weren't just my professors, but people who just worked at the school. And I think she might be on this stream, but Christina Hayes Haley, who is the gallery manager, she actually helped me get my show at the Trinity River Audubon. So, as well as admin assistants, so Rebecca Prince, there's so many people that were so helpful at University of Dallas that made it such a strong community. Because when I left Northwest, I guess kind of when I left Northwest had such a strong community. And then going to UW, there's still a bit of community, but then I went up to Eastern Montana and kind of lost that. And it was really nice to go to a school that had that strong sense of community, which is something we're talking about here with showing at Gestalt and kind of missing our community. It's kind of interesting, but yeah.
Yeah. Cool. My turn?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So I took a roundabout way to getting to making work, and then have veered away from it. And this is actually the first show that I've had in 5 years, possibly more, might be 6, but I think it's 5. I haven't really made work consistently since like 2014. So this is a really exciting thing. I'm super stoked. But yeah, I started out at Northwest College as well, but I started out in the archaeology anthropology program. And I had wanted to be an archaeologist since I was 4 years old, when my grandma took me rock hunting for the first time. And like, I have the paper when you go to kindergarten and they have they make you fill out the thing, what you want to do when you grow up. And it said, my name is Brandy. I want to be an archaeologist. And I spelled it right. Like, I was serious about that.
Very important.
So that was my whole thing. And I set up my whole life to be an archaeologist. My grandma took me on my first actual real dig when I was 15, with the college, Northwest College. So I got to go on a 1-week field school, and I worked my butt off. See, I didn't get those. I worked my butt off, and the guy who was leading the dig asked me to come back, and so she and I did 2 more digs that summer. And in Wyoming, laws are weird, and so once you log 300 field hours, you can actually get a card from the state, so you can work for the Park Service. So for the rest of the time I was in high school, I started working on my 300 field hours. I'm working in comments. Started working on my 300 field hours so that by the time I graduated high school, I could actually work for state as an archaeologist. So I got a job with the National Park Service the day after I graduated. And then they were helping me get my education so that I could move up in the field. And so I went for anthropology. And I did that for a while. I worked as an archaeological intern for Bighorn Canyon National Recreation Area, which is amazing. And if you're in Montana or Wyoming, definitely visit. It's very cool. And so I did that. And then, but I was 18 and I was waking up at 5 a.m. to go survey and then come home and do classes and homework and try to be an 18-year-old and do the party thing and have friends and all of that. And it was a little bit much. And so I got really disenfranchised with it. It was also working for the state is a lot of bureaucracy, which was not my jam. It was a great job and I loved it, but at the time it was not my thing. And so my mom, I was like ready to drop out of school, was totally done. And my mom was like, just take a whole semester and just do fun things, take music classes and art classes and see if you still want to be in school and if you find something else you want to do. So I wanted to take painting because I hated clay. And then, right? I hated clay, never wanted to touch clay again. I had an amazing art teacher in high school, Karen Dunbar, and we would do like a couple clay projects a year, but she did drawing and painting and print and everything. But those were really her things. And the clay, like we would use clay to make molds and stuff. So as a stepping stone to something else. And when I tried to make something out of clay, I just like, it didn't make sense. I hated all of it. I hated the way it felt. I hated how it made my hands feel. It was awful. But I couldn't get into a painting class because I decided all of this last minute. So I started a clay class with Elaine DeVere, who is the best person, and fell instantly in love with it because it was just a totally different way of looking at ceramics than I had ever seen. And at the same time that I met Elaine and got to take that class, I was really lucky to get to go to Israel on an archaeological dig with a mentor of mine, Doug Nelson, who used to be at Northwest College. So we went to Israel together and I got to work on a Roman fort for 2.5 weeks. And during that time, we were just finding pottery all over the place. Like in Wyoming and Montana, it's really hard to find Native American pots, and it's not something you come across very often, and it's just like this cool thing. And in Israel, like you step and you kick a pot. And so, but I was fascinated by it, and we were finding all these really cool pots that were made by the Romans and Crusaders and all sorts of cool things. And the woman who ran the dig knew a whole lot about the cultures who created them, but not really like the process for how they were made. So I wanted to take an art class. I also wanted to know how the stuff that I was finding was made. So jumped in with Elaine and she was amazing. And so then I changed my major and I decided to be an art major. and I ended up, after Northwest, I moved up to Missoula and I did an internship with the Clay Studio in Missoula, which was absolutely lovely. Another amazing community art center that you should definitely try to support, especially right now, but all the time. They have excellent programs and they're always doing cool things. I didn't cuss again. Are you proud of me? Pointed out every time I don't have to pay $1. If you weren't here for the beginning, Callie and I are playing a game because both of us have terrible mouths. And so we are donating 50% of our proceeds to Gestalt, and then 50% of our proceeds to Partners in Health. And last night when we were doing the technical run through, I couldn't stop cussing. So decided that every time I cuss, I have to donate an extra $1 to charity. So this is the game for each of us.
But we haven't been cussing very much, so
We're doing good. What's our count at, Erin?
We have to wait.
There's a 20-second lag, so it'll show up in the comments in like 20 seconds.
Let's
and
just
we'll see
wait.
what our count is at. She's supposed to be counting. Also, it's drinking.
Yeah,
game.
we should
play along at home. Okay, where was I at? So, support your local art studios. Clay Studio Missoula was amazing. They helped me get a portfolio together. Because at the time I came up here, I wasn't sure if I wanted to continue and get an art degree or if I wanted to try something else. I had taken a little bit of time off of school. So Hannah, who used to be the director over there, and Shalene Valenzuela, who is the director now, who was a resident at the time, and some of the other residents, Steve Wicklin and a few other people helped me get my portfolio together and pick out schools. And I applied to a bunch of different places. And I got into a school in upstate New York, Alfred University, that's pretty much a clay school. And we do ceramics and ceramic engineering, and there's a real badass, there's a real badass equine program. There you go, $3. But yeah, not a ton of people know, but it's a great ceramic school, and I was super lucky to get to go there. I had amazing professors, and there was an amazing grad program there. So, I mean, Cal was talking about what an awesome experience she had at grad school. I didn't go to grad school, but there were 16 grads in the program where I was. So, like, that was just this huge resource. Like, our professors were amazing, but I got to work with some amazing artists who were grad students at the time. And so that was great. We will end the reception with a string of profanity.
Is that what?
We went from 0 to 3 real quick there.
Well, they'll probably stop the stream if we cuss a lot, so we'll just end.
They will. This was what we found last night. We kept getting the stream stopped because it wasn't child friendly. Anyway, yeah, so I went to Alfred. I was there for several years, and then I did some residencies after that. I was really lucky, got to work at Penland School of Arts and Crafts twice. And I lived in Ohio and did some teaching with the Akron Art Museum, and I taught some kids classes in Hudson, Ohio, and was the director of an arts camp. And I did all of that, and then I ended up getting a residency in Taos, New Mexico. And so I moved out there to do a residency, and then a whole series of things happened, which, sorry, dog. Bean! Bean, come here. We live in COVID times. The dog interrupts the live stream. Anyway, so I went down to Taos, New Mexico. I bought a community art center, the place that I had my residency. Long string of events, but anyway, I ended up buying it. And so I ran Taos Clay Center in New Mexico for 3 years. Came up here and was going to go to grad school for art history, and then took another total swing and applied for a job that had nothing to do with that at my dream company and got it. So now I work for DFTBA Records, helping YouTubers and podcasters and awesome people make really cool things.
Yeah.
So that was a roundabout way of talking about my work or my history.
It's really cool. And I think like it's still a very creative job because you're helping these creators on YouTube, and
it is.
you get to work with them every day.
Yeah, it's been awesome for me because I bought the studio and it was amazing. I don't know if anybody from Taos Clay is in the chat, but they're fabulous. And the studio was awesome. The thing about it was I bought the studio and I had like all these great resources and I was like, I'm gonna make art every day. And I didn't make art for 3.5 years because I made demos and I taught classes and I did that, but like mostly I helped other people make their art, which was fabulous. But I was helping other people make ceramics, and I would go home and the last thing in the universe that I wanted to do was touch clay. So now I get to go to work and help people make art, but it's not the kind of art that I make. So I go home and I want to touch clay, and that's fabulous.
Yes. Yes. Cool.
Cool. So yeah, that's a little bit of like our background, our schooling, how we got where we're at. We were going to talk a little bit about how we chose the title for the work before we go through the actual work that's in the show. If you were here at the very beginning, Cal talked about it a little bit when we met at Northwest 14 years ago. We were both super, super shy. And we sat at the same table for a semester and probably talked for like a grand total of a half an hour because we were both really shy.
It took a long time.
It was, but we went to Spain with our amazing professor Ann Toner, and we found out that we were both into Chris Thiele, who at the time was starting a new band, the Punch Brothers. And then we also came up to Missoula with her. I don't remember why. I think we came to a show at the museum.
I think. Oh, or was that with John when he would take us up to?
Maybe it was John.
Missoula.
Anyway, one of our awesome professors brought us to Missoula, and we went to Rock and Rudy's, and we ended up both looking for the same new CD that Chris Thiele had out. And so after that, we started hanging out, and we went to music festivals and all that kind of stuff, and then we were BFFs. But so that had so much to do with us becoming friends and with our creative journeys together, because we ended up, we've influenced each other's art a lot. I think I can say that. If you look at our art together, it feels very much like it belongs together. And we're kind of each other's go-tos when we're getting the creative block and stuff. So yeah, because of that, and also, we wanted to take a title from a Punch Brothers song. And also we live in some crazy times. And so there's a line in the song Familiarity, which is on the album Phosphorescent Blues, which everybody should own.
Has a Magritte painting on the cover, which just, if you don't know how we're tying this to art, I don't know.
Yeah. It's great. It's a really good painting. It took me a really long time to realize that cover was a painting, like a very famous one.
Well, but also to say, not only did we love the Punch Brothers and everything, but we would do this weird thing when a new album of theirs would come out, and we'd send it to each other, and we'd listen to it, and we'd call each other on the phone, and our favorite songs from the album were always the same. It's the weirdest. It's really weird.
Favorite songs, favorite lines, favorite everything. And it was so funny because when we did that for this show, Callie had the awesome idea and was like, because I'm so bad with names, as you've probably seen on the show, because I name things Arches or, whatever. I'm bad with names. And I was like, Cal, what are we going to do? And she's like, oh, we should pick something from a Punch Brothers song, which obviously is what we should do. And then we were kind of listening to the album separately all day. We were going to get on a call, and we started texting each other and had a few ideas. And I'm like, I don't know, I was kind of thinking Together When, and she's like, that's it. It's like it was the same. We had the same thought, same time. And but
I'm like crying.
I feel like it so speaks to the time we're in right now that none of us anticipated being in, and also like Cal and I's entire friendship, because we met in one place, and like I basically lived on your parents' couch and saw each other every day. And then I moved to New York, and she moved to Dallas, and I moved to New Mexico, and she moved to Montana, and like we've never been in the same place, and we just got to this place where we're within 5 hours drive of each other.
We're on the same side of the country now. We're not on opposite ends. And so, yeah, together when, like, we were always kind of thinking when we would see each other, and it was so rare. And we would just kind of fall back into being best friends, and then we would have to leave each other. And I think we were always thinking, like, okay, when are we going to be together again? And so together when, not only is it talking about our entire community at large, where we're all wondering that, when can we all be together again? When can we all just like go out and, you know, go to a coffee shop and be around other humans? But when are we going to be together? You know, and that was, so it's kind of this weird thing that we're relating our friendship to kind of the world at large.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, shall we jump into the artwork? I hope you guys have all been able to see the show. It's really beautiful, and we want to thank Erin for putting this all together online. And Tiana, I know you helped some too. But thank you so very much for getting all of our work online and making sure that we got our things done on time, which I'm sure Callie would not have had a problem with, but I do. And just making it look beautiful. It was wonderful. And for facilitating all of this stuff. It's so nice to be able to do a show. I mean, when we first thought that, okay, well, the show's not going to happen, maybe we should move it online, my thought was, okay, like that's cool. I'm glad we can put it together, but like, you don't get the community, you don't get the interaction, you don't get to go to the artist talks, you don't get to go touch the things. And so Erin and Callie had the idea to do live streams and demos and all of this. And it's so wonderful that we are in the position that we are, where we can still be part of community while we were, you're more than emotional support, Tiana. We can still be part of a community, and we can still be creating a community around artwork and around creativity while we can't be in a physical space. So it's really lovely.
And it's kind of neat because now the community has expanded. So if it was just a Gestalt, which is really wonderful, but it's such a downside that we can't be with our community. But I think the upside is that our community has expanded. So people from Texas who I've met, who are friends, are able to see the show, and Brandy has people in New Mexico and all over the country. But so it's kind of neat that that we get to share it with more people. So even though it is it's a little awkward, it's a little difficult. I think the best part about art is being there and seeing it, and sometimes getting to touch it. So it is really difficult when it is online, but I think that this is really wonderful, being able to share it with more people, for sure.
Definitely. Cool. Well, do you want to talk about yours first, Cal?
Okay. Sure. All right. So my artwork really kind of, I mean, this probably goes without saying, but I'll say it anyway, but my artwork really started to progress and take off in grad school. So like I said, the teachers, the professors there really helped me kind of figure out what I wanted to make and how did I want to make it. And they were really good, like, bullshit detectors too. So like I would come up to one of them like in a critique or something and be like, I have this great idea. Oh my gosh, I'm going to make this buffalo skull. And then I'm going to look at female nudes throughout history, and I'm going to put the bison skull on top of those nudes. And they're like, yeah, maybe you should do some kind of abstract thing and go over here for a bit and think about that and then come back. And then it's like, okay, never mind. I just really love landscape. And they're like, yes, you do. So it was really nice to kind of be in that environment. And again, having a major professor that really kind of would help me. He wasn't guiding me. He wasn't pushing me. He was just making sure that, yeah, I don't know about that. I'm going to give you an assignment to kind of do this that will help you kind of make sure that you're enjoying what you're doing. And I think that was really important because at the University of Dallas, you get 2 degrees. So I got an MA degree, so a Master of Arts degree, and an MFA degree, a Master of Fine Arts degree, which is the gold degree that you're trying to get. But you have 2 thesis exhibitions. So I was thinking about this today. when I had my MA degree, I was a year and a half into my grad experience. And when I got done, it's almost like you were at this, like the top of your game, and then you just kind of plummet. So you had this amazing show, and then you just kind of go down, and you have to start all over again. So you have to pick yourself back up, start making artwork again, and do an even bigger show for your MFA. And if the professors hadn't got me to a point where I was really enjoying my work, where I was wanting to make my work, I don't think I would have made artwork that entire next semester. So I think that was really important how they were teaching us. So I thought I'd show really quickly just kind of where I was at, probably about a year in. See if this works. Is that showing a printed piece?
Yep, we gotcha.
Okay. So this is kind of where I started to really think about the landscape. So I think we've been talking about this a bit, but I grew up in, rural Wyoming and Montana, and my family's really into like being out in nature. So everybody in my family, except me, fly fishes. Everybody loves kind of going out and trekking around and like rock hunting and going out and being in the landscape. So I grew up thinking that that was the normal, that you're in this immense, crazy, beautiful landscape. I'm actually sitting here next to a window just looking out at the mountains, and it's really kind of wonderful. But mountains and ridges and different things like that have always been kind of in my background. And then I moved to Dallas, and it's a completely different environment. It's a completely different part of the US. I thought that everywhere was like where I was from. And I think it's kind of hard not to think that when you haven't really been anywhere. And so when I moved to Dallas, it's like, oh, this isn't like home at all. And also being so used to having these big mountains in your background, and then you move to a very flat area, and those mountains are replaced with a city skyline. It was really weird. So I started to get really nostalgic, and I started to make artwork kind of about memories from home, or memories of what I thought the landscape looked like. So I was looking at pictures from home, but usually when I would make these pieces, I was just tearing paper to look like ridges or mountains or canyons. And after a while, I started to realize that some of the landscapes that I was making, some of these ridges, were actually physical places in Montana or Wyoming. They were just kind of burned into my mind. And I'm thinking a lot about that now, like kind of what I'm looking at all the time that's kind of burned into my mind and kind of making me think differently about it. So let's see if I can, this isn't too awkward. So this is from my MA show. And I, again, still working a lot with the landscape. So thinking of home, this is me thinking about the Wind River Canyon. And then also thinking about how things change. So the landscape never stays constant. As much as we think that the mountains are going to be permanent and stay the same, as soon as there's something in our atmosphere, as soon as there's snow, or right now there's like a lot of dust up in the air because they're tilling the fields. But the mountains can kind of disappear and go away. So to me, it almost, makes them fragile in a weird way. But so I was thinking a lot about that. So using printmaking where you can use the same image over and over again, which is called a matrix, and changing that subtly, changing it drastically, but doing different things like that. In the show, I was also looking at different animals as well in plant species. And in my MFA, I really dive into it. But I was looking at migratory birds that were found on Lewis and Clark expedition, as well as thinking of, I keep going way far back, as well as thinking about invasive species and different plant species that we have, both in Wyoming and in Texas. So I was looking at things that kind of were a shared link between the two places. Okay, I'm gonna stop share. Okay, and I'm back. Am I back? I can't hear you. Can you hear me? Oh,
I muted myself because the dog was talking.
Oh, okay. I'm like, what is that? Brandy, come back. We just talked about how we need to be together.
I know.
Okay. Let's see. So, trying to think. Okay. Yeah. So, as I was living in Dallas, as I'm living in this very urban environment, I started to sort of get used to it. And I would go home. I would go home for the summers. I would go home for Christmas and kind of be just back in my element, back in that landscape. But what I started to kind of figure out as my MFA was approaching was that my time with nature started to become much more honed in. So in Montana and Wyoming, you can just sometimes just look outside and there it is. There is your access to nature. Sometimes I, like where I'm working right now, so I work at Coleco Foundry, which is a bronze foundry where we're making bronze statues for artists. During my lunch hour, I'll leave and it takes me about 10 minutes and I'll go on a walk and I feel like I'm completely like just out and like not really in the middle of town anymore. I'm just kind of out in nature. And it's really wonderful. In Dallas, I had to kind of hone in a lot if I did want to just feel like I was in nature or different things like that. So when I would walk from my apartment, like I was saying before, when I would walk from my apartment to the art village, there would be these little sections where, oh, I almost feel like I'm kind of just, you know, out of the city. But we were right next to some major highways. So the sound of the city was always there. So you couldn't really escape the urban environment. So my relationship with nature became more about identification. So I was looking at what birds I was seeing. I was looking at what plants I was seeing. And then once I knew that I was going to be showing at the Trinity River Audubon, it became very specific to me that I wanted to show birds that they would definitely see at the Audubon, so people could go out on their trails and come back in and see the birds that they just saw, but kind of my idea of them, as well as invasive plant species that they were dealing with at the preserve. So while I was thinking about birds, I wanted things that had a bit of movement, right? So birds and invasive species. Invasive species, like when I think about them, they invade, they come into an area. So there's this movement, they cross a border, they cross a line. You think that they could, maybe they'll just stay over there, but they don't. It really, they kind of are on the move and they take over different sections. And I was also thinking about migratory birds and that movement. And I really liked that idea. But also what I really liked was that with migratory birds, there's a connection to home because a lot of these birds are coming from the north. So I grew up seeing one side of birds migratory, or the birds migration. So they're with us, they come back in the spring, they're with us sometimes through the summer, sometimes they go way further north, and then in the fall they leave. That had always been my experience. And then I moved to Texas and I saw the complete opposite. The birds leave in the spring, but they come back in the late fall. And so I started to call my mom, who loves bird watching, and I started to ask her, okay, what birds are you seeing? Because I knew which ones would migrate through Dallas. And she always calls them her birds. Oh, well, my cedar waxwings have just left.
I love
and
it.
so this, because she takes care of them, she puts out food and water for them and everything. But so she told me this in October. Okay, the cedar waxwings just left. She was really bummed out. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, I'll keep an eye out for him. Well, didn't happen. And then in December, I was leaving my studio and I was just about to head home for Christmas. And I was like, there's no chance that I'm seeing these birds. And I walk out of my studio and they have completely taken over a tree right outside of my studio. And so it was just kind of this weird like link. And my sister said one time, she was like, maybe we should have sent him a note, you know, like this kind of physical, like, oh, we could have like had this link together. And not only was it the same bird that I was talking to my mom about, but the birds were in an invasive species called an eastern cedar tree, which I was making artwork about that day. And so it's this weird kind of like crazy thing, like, okay, not some, I feel like I'm a very realistic person. Like I like science. And so it's just like, okay, I'm on the right track. Like, okay, I know about these birds. They're called cedar waxwings. And then I know about this invasive species called, you know, eastern cedar. And it's like, oh, okay, yeah, this is actually happening. So I'm going to do the thing again where I switch my screen. Let's see. Okay. So I ended up doing a bunch of different birds. The largest one was this turkey vulture, which was about 6 feet long. It was really important to me that they were all the actual size of the bird, just for different scale. So it would be different, you know, you'd have a larger piece and smaller pieces, and you could actually get a feel for like just how small some of these birds are, but also with the turkey vultures, just to see how big they are. Let's see. Oops. And again, I like playing with the multiple. So here is the cedar waxwing, but having different variations of the same bird. So thinking of it in different light. This one's called Sun in Your Eyes. And so kind of like thinking about the cedar waxwing and like how, especially this one, like if you look at something long enough and it almost burns an impression in your eye. And so you kind of have a double of that image. And so thinking a lot about that with these pieces. Let's see if I can go back. So when I was gearing up for my show at, oh, did I not put these on here? I may not have my plants on here. Uh-oh. Let's try it again. Oh, no, here they come. So when I was gearing up for my MFA at Trinity River, Audubon, the woman who was helping me kind of organize everything took me on a tour of the grounds and talked to me about all the different invasive species that they had. So here's the eastern cedar. And ceramics has never really kind of left me. I've always still been obsessed with ceramics. So I had little ceramic elements in the pieces. You can see down here, these are berries. So it's almost feeling like the berries are kind of falling down into this little tray. But I thought it would be really interesting to talk about the invasive species and what they're dealing with at the center. And also if I wanted to talk about native plant species, I felt like there was going to be too many plants for me to choose from. They were dealing with 7 invasive species at the time, so I thought it would be much easier to work with. And I like this one. This one's called Daughter. This is an invasive parasitic plant that can completely take over areas. And I thought I'd like to show its kind of growth and how it, you know, kind of tangles and wraps around. So, okay, and a back. Let's see. Okay, so Wyoming, I'm kind of back on my home turf, right? Back in that landscape, back in, you know, this environment where I don't have to kind of hone in and just look for birds. Oh, and I was also going to talk about this. So with the birds that I was working on, they were all birds that you could see all across Dallas. But I remember when I was gearing up for my show, one of the professors, the sculpture professors, Phil Shore, brought some of his students into the print shop one day, and he was like, "Oh, Callie, show them your birds." And so I was showing him all these birds, and I'm like, "Yeah, these are all birds that you can see here in Dallas." And somebody said, I don't see any birds here. There's no birds here. And I was like, no, there are. And she's like, no, there's no birds in Dallas, or none of these birds are here. And it's like, no, I think you're just not seeing them. And so that made me think a lot about like, oh, wow, like we live in this environment with these birds, and sometimes people really don't see them or don't notice them. And so, and I remember I was showing them the turkey vulture, and I was like, they're circling right outside right now. Or some of the different birds that I was working with, they're like out, I can see them outside the window of the print shop. They're right out there. But it's kind of interesting how, like I say, like things are in our background, like sometimes we don't pay attention to it as much. So I came back here, and I was kind of thinking that my artwork would kind of just go back to being about the landscape and the different animals and things like that. But just as much as Montana and Wyoming kind of almost like had their, like really had a presence in my mind when I was in Dallas. Since I've left Dallas, and it hasn't been a year yet, so it's just been, still seems recent that I've left. I'm still thinking a lot about Dallas. And so where before my artwork is just like, there's no human presence. It's all, the landscape is just the landscape. There's no, there's no human structures or anything like that. And the animals are just the animals. Now I'm starting to think about, well, let me put it this way. So when I go on my walks at lunch, I love to kind of take pictures and think about different artwork that I want to make. And I noticed that when I was taking pictures, I was specifically trying to avoid man-made structures in the picture. So I'd be walking out, we call it Beck Lake here, and it's this beautiful lake that you can walk around. And I remember I was walking up the trail, and there's this mountain here called Hart Mountain. I was like, oh my God, that's such a beautiful shot. But town was right below it. And I go, oh, wait, if I back up a bit, you can't see town. I'll take a picture. It's like, well, why am I doing that? Why am I avoiding? These things are kind of in our environment. Why am I not just trying to depict this environment? So I'm going to share this one. Okay, so I started to think about just putting these different man-made structures into my prints. And so let's see, let's do a different one. Where's the other one? Well, shoot. Anyway, so I was kind of stenciling out these different areas in the print that were these man-made structures. And then I'm going back in with colored pencils and just kind of either filling them in or kind of making them part of the piece. That wasn't really my first intention. When I was working on these, I was actually able to go into a print shop. So this is what's really interesting about the artwork that's in the show, especially for me, because you go from pieces that are actually physically printed on a print shop to drawing. And it's almost like this timeline of what's happening right now with COVID-19. But so I was able to use the print shop at Northwest College. And so I was going to print these and have this this piece right here stenciled out, and then use other printmaking processes to kind of blend it in or make it stick out more. But instead of being able to use the press, here I'm using colored pencils and graphite, which I think works just as well. But instead of trying to avoid these man-made structures, I kind of want to start making them part of the pieces now. So fence posts like we see here, that kind of block what we're seeing past them, right? So kind of reminding us of that presence. So I think I'm still affected by the urban environment in Dallas, and I don't know if I'm missing it or just thinking a lot about it, but I'm like searching for like these human-made things in the landscape now. Let's see. And then I wanted to talk about these ones really quickly, and then I'll I'll finish up. But so recently, you know, I'm home a lot. I go to work, which I'm very lucky that I can go to work, but I go to work and I come home. And I have ended up falling in love with plants. Both Mark Ritchie and Stephen Fauch kept a bunch of plants in the print shop in order to kind of take toxins out of the air. And they also just look nice. But I've been keeping a lot of plants, and I've also been trying to regrow plants from leaves. And it's taken a lot of time. So this one is from a leaf. This drawing is from a leaf that I actually cut in half and put in soil. And then right now, and it's actually more, there's more growth than this, but there's little leaves that are starting to kind of grow out of this, I guess, kind of dying leaf. And then with this one, this is from a succulent. So this large part right here is a large kind of leaf from a succulent that I just laid on soil and slowly watered. And over the months, it started to grow a new succulent. So I thought, like, I'm drawing these things because I think it's really cool and it's in my environment and it's something that I can look at. But I also thought that it's like during this time right now, we need so much patience and everything seems to be moving kind of like everything happens so quick, but now things are happening very slow. And I kind of think about these a lot, these little plants that are just kind of taking their time and growing. And then one day you look at them and all of a sudden you have a second plant that came from a leaf, which is just kind of crazy to me. But yeah. Let's see. Yeah. Did I miss anything? Let's see.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. That was awesome. Oops. As I knocked my computer. That was really great. I love hearing about the new work too, because the last time I really saw your work was when you installed for your MFA show. And I saw the starts pieces for our show before we had to stop seeing each other. But I wasn't really sure what they were going to end up like. So it's cool to see how they transitioned. And yeah, I love the stuff.
When I don't know. Yeah, I don't know where they would have gone. It's such an interesting time. Like, I don't know where they would have gone if I still had access to the print shop, because I think I definitely would have still been using the shop, or these might have just been like thoughts, and then I did different prints. Kind of like, I think printmakers are lucky in that way that we can just kind of keep printing, mm-hmm. and print until you get what you want. So me kind of having to stop and just work at home. And luckily I grabbed my prints first of all, because I almost didn't.
Right?
But yeah, this show would have been very different. A lot more drawings, I think. But because yeah, like, so again, being a printmaker, being in a print shop, there's this thing in screen printing and relief called printing out of a situation. So if you mess up, like in screen printing, if you're printing and the ink starts to dry out, you can just kind of keep printing and print yourself out of that situation. So I think a lot of printmakers do that. We just keep printing and kind of figure it out and keep printing on the same piece, grab new sheet of paper and keep printing from there. So this is kind of the first time where I just kind of went home with prints and just kind of sat down with them and played around and went from there, which was really kind of wonderful. So kind of slowed me down a bit, I guess, in a good way.
Yeah. Sorry, I just had to write that down because I'm going to use that in my work.
Get yourself out of a situation.
Yeah, I love that printing your way out, because I mean, I did the same thing with mine, and like ceramics has a long lead time, and I also don't own a kiln, and so I rent space over at the Clay Studio of Missoula. I have a very small apartment, so I rent space over at the Clay Studio, and so I had a bunch of pieces in progress, and I had a very different vision of what I was going to make for this show, and then I got home in March and couldn't leave again. So I've got some cool pieces that will become a different show at some point. But I can make things with unfired clay, but that makes things difficult to sell. And, you know, I could rework pieces that I had bisque fired and work through surfaces that aren't fired surfaces, which I really enjoy anyway. So I do a little bit of that. But yeah, it was kind of going back to my toolkit from undergrad and like, okay, you know, when you're in undergrad especially, or at least at my school, and I know with you, they kind of give you like less than you need to the project. They give you an idea that's way too big. And then you are 20, so you make it even bigger. And then you're going to fucking change the world. Dash it all. With an amazing idea. So you make a giant, and then you end up having 20 hours to do it, and then nothing works, and you don't have all the resources you need, and somebody else is using the kiln that you want, and so you have to think your way out. And so yeah, it was kind of fun to get a little bit back in that mindset, because we found this out in ceramic time, like relatively close to the show, and printing as well. And you know, you've got all the different layers and things to work with, so it's not just you put the mark on the paper and it's done. And so yeah, it was interesting, and it led to some really cool new things, and it gave me the opportunity to play a lot, which was really fun, because I haven't done that in a long time. And yeah,
I know I'm excited to hear you talk about like, not spoilers, but to hear you talk about, because you had planned on doing ceramics, and then you went to plaster, and you kept telling me about the pieces that you were making, and I was like, yeah, and I could not picture them, and then I looked at them and I'm like, oh wow, that's not what I was expecting, and I'm so excited.
They weren't what I was expecting either. It was kind of funny. I had this whole idea in mind, which I can talk about I guess I can just start talking about my work, but yeah, I had a whole idea in mind, and I was gonna make these forms out of plaster, and then the mold didn't work, but the way that it didn't work was really cool. And so then I started working in that direction, and it was great. I work like that a lot, actually. I learned that, well, I've learned that from a lot of people, but I had one particular professor, once I got to Alfred Walter McConnell, this is one of my most vivid memories of being there, and it was my first class with him. And it was a hand-built ceramics class, which was not the class I wanted to be in, because anyway, I had to take it, and I was like, all right.
Well, can I say, you were a thrower and I was a hand builder?
Yeah. Oh, that is the funny thing.
And then you became. I never became a thrower, but.
I left Northwest. I was going to make thrown, like these really beautifully, perfectly thrown wood-fired functional pots. That's what I was gonna make. And Callie was making these amazing hand-built bowls. I have one. I can show it off. It might have ice cream in it. Making these amazing,
very loose.
Very cool. I have the brain bowl, actually. And like these really great hand-built sculptures of women that were at all these different angles, and they were so cool. And like we went like that. It was great. I'm so grateful for it. And I don't know if it's that we went like that. It's that I went like this.
And also like our taste in ceramics. Like I remember we were at Nsika one time, and you were like all the gooey ceramic pieces. You're like, oh, I love those. And I'm like, look at this minimal one that's just white. And you're like, yeah.
No, I want the goop, and I want all the like stuff on stuff, and I want it in my mouth. It's terrible. Yeah, no, I love it. And I'm super excited that I went where I did. I went to the college that I went to for not the best reasons. I went there because it had a really good name, and they would not let me do what I wanted to do. And that was the best thing that ever happened. And I think if I had known going into it what they were going to expect from me, I never would have gone. And I'm so grateful that I did, and that nobody there let me do the thing that I had in my head when I got there. But yeah, it was cool. But I was talking about
it was good.
Demo that I had with Walter, my first class at Alfred. It was the hand-built ceramics class, and I was mad because they didn't let you take throwing until you were a junior, and I was transferred to the top. So I was so mad. It was the best class. I still use, I'm actually going to use the techniques here in a second that I learned in that class, that particular demo with Walter. And it was so fun though, because we were making pinched forms, but you had to start in the middle of a form and build up one side with no flat spaces on it. The whole form had to have no flat spots. So you build up one side from the middle, and then once it sat up enough, you'd flip it over and then you'd build up the other side, but there were no flat spots. It could be any shape, as long as it didn't sit flat on the table. It had to rock.
Nice.
So we start building, and he's making this big old round thing and making these big coils. And like, it was such a cool way of making coils that I still use. And he gets a few layers on, and he starts using this Sureform, which is like a cheese grater, to sand off some of the bigger edges. And then he gets super distracted by the stuff that came off from the cheese grater and starts building something with that. And he's like, kind of goes off for like 10 minutes and like forgets what he was talking about. And is just making a thing. And he's like, oh yeah, I was teaching you. Sometimes I get distracted, and sometimes you just realize that the thing that you started making is not as cool as the thing that you started making from the parts you took off of that. Like, I loved it. It's so good. I think I was initially trying to tie that back to the thinking out of things, but anyway.
Yes, no, that makes sense. That makes sense.
Yeah, so that's a good place to jump into my work. So yeah, I was making wood-fired ceramics, and Elaine, I don't know if Elaine is still watching, but she can attest to this. I never wanted to be making wood-fired functional work because I kept making these functional pieces that were sculptural, but I just needed them to be pots. Like, I really needed them to be pots, and I don't know why. And I needed them to be fired in a wood kiln, even though they didn't need to be. It's just like, had a thing. But yeah, I wanted, but I had gone to Israel, like I talked about. I spent time in Israel, and while I was there, I got to see this really amazing rock structure that I don't remember the name of. It was a long time back, but it looked like columns, like Greek columns or something, and they were just these massive things. And I came back to Elaine's class, and I started making stacks of bowls and big pots. It was really funny when Cal and I were in throwing class together. I sat right next to our friend Bruce, who made these, like, he was this big army guy and made these tiny little porcelain pots. And I sat next to him, and I was making these things that I wanted to look like the place in Israel, and I had to stand on my chair and throw all the way down because they were like as big as me. But they had to be functional for some reason in my head. So, but I was making these stacks of pots, and I've always really enjoyed like things on things on things, and making the same thing over and over, but then making a sculptural piece with it. So I started working on that at Alfred. And I got a lot of opportunities to play with that kind of repetition and different ways to work through that. And I also got pushed in a very non-functional direction. And during my first hand-built class, I kept trying to make everything pots, and finally they just beat it out of me for a semester. And I still make pots. I mean, you'll see some of the pieces in the show are pots, and there is nothing wrong with it. But I think if you can get yourself out of your comfort zone and, you know, really try and think, like Callie was saying, you know, really try and think, what is it I'm trying to make? Why is it I'm trying to make this? Not necessarily, you know, it needs to be made out of this type of clay. It needs to be fired in this type of way. But like, what is it that I'm trying to say? And then, you know, like you were making the buffalo pieces, and they're like, I think you need to make something abstract. And I kept forcing myself into these pots, and they're like, I really think you're trying to make sculpture here. So yeah, so I moved in that direction. And I did, like, I took some classes where I made very, very functional work that was sculptural, that I made these cool, I'm sorry, I don't have any pictures of any of this. My computer died, and I was always terrible at taking pictures, but I do have pictures of my show from there, so I'll show that. But I made these centerpieces for a while that just looked like these big floral centerpieces, and then you pulled them apart into a whole bunch of different a whole bunch of different pots. Thanks, Tuna. Oh, it was so good. I'm so glad you were here. Say bye to my friend Tuna. Yeah, so brain. I was making I ended up throughout school kind of going in that direction. And I ended up, as they kind of pushed me in directions that were scary to me and that I wasn't sure that I was ready to go in and that weren't necessarily in line with that thing I initially went in as, I found that what I was really trying to do was to make artifacts. And I think a lot of what I had found in archaeology was this deep connection to people. And I love community and I love people and I love the stories that people tell and the mythologies that we tell and the ways that our culture are built around that. And there was this very poignant moment for me when I was an archaeologist, when I was working outside of Grable, Wyoming, up in Shell. It was my first dig actually with my grandma when I was 14. And we were working in this tiny little space. It was a rock shelter, so not quite a cave. It didn't go all the way back, but it was, would shelter you from the rain. And there was a fire pit in there, and the site was somewhere between around 6,000 years old, dated because of the artifacts that we found. And it was a fire pit, and you could see where people had been sitting around it flint knapping because you were seeing all these tiny little flakes that had come off of these stones as they were making tools. And so every time you found a piece that was more than, I want to say 2 millimeters, they were small. We were mapping really small things. We had to collect it and draw it and map it. And we created this map of the whole site and every artifact that came out of it. And over the course of the summer, there were thousands of artifacts that came out because it was all these tiny little pieces of bone that people had been eating and then throwing into the fire, and tiny little pieces of stone from tools that they were making. And at the end of the summer, when you when you laid out the whole map, from all the layers that we dug down, you could see 3 empty spaces where the people had been sitting and all of the stones around them. And that image has never left my head. And it struck me so hard at 14 to see, like, there's this actual physical connection between me and a person who was sitting in exactly the same spot 6,000 years ago, who I will never know, whose life I have no glimpse into, but I can sit in the spot and know exactly what they were doing. And I love that what is actually just garbage, things that nobody wanted, can tell such a poignant story about a person. And so I really started looking into where we get stories from, and can objects hold those stories, and what kinds of objects hold those stories, and what kind of context holds that story. Because if you just picked up one of those pieces of garbage, all the context is gone and that story's not there. But seeing them together, it becomes a totally different narrative. So that's kind of where my mind went with my work. And when I was at Alfred, let me see if I can share my screen. Share screen. Let's see. Whiteboard. Huh. I don't know if I can share it. I do know that I can't.
Is it one of the pieces in the show, or?
No, it is not. I was going to try and share with you my, hold on, I can find it. Give me 2 seconds. Technical difficulties. While I find this for y'all, just to remember, if you make us cuss, we will donate an extra $1. And all proceeds from all the work that we're selling, all the work that's online, is going to be split 50-50 between Gestalt and Partners in Health. So go buy some cool art. And as soon as we get these demos going here in a sec, we are going to be donating those pieces as well. Let's pretend this is Project for Awesome and plug some stuff. Ceramics. So here's the problem. I don't have a website anymore, because I I don't really make art anymore. This is the first time I've made art in like 5 years. And I used to have a website and then I stopped making art. And so I let that all lapse, and then my computer died, so all these photos are gone. So I'm having to like dig them up on the internet. And one of these days is going to fix my computer for me, and it's going to exist. But anyway, I'm gonna try and find these for you really quick, because I know that I had them on my old website. There we go. There it is. I found it. Cool. So I ended up, while I was at school, I started making work about souvenirs, because I feel like those are objects that really hold stories. And when we, when you go to the Grand Canyon or to Yellowstone or something like that, and you pick up that thing, and so then you can take it home and be like, I was there, I was part of that, I got to experience this thing, and that object holds that story. And to an extent, that object holds that story even when you're gone, because it's your little shot glass that says Yellowstone. And so people can insert themselves into that narrative. And then, so I started doing that when I was at Alfred. And let me go ahead and share this, because I did find it online someplace. Google Chrome 2. Let's see. No, I don't want to share that one. Okay. Here we go. Are we here? Cal, can you see it?
Yes.
Can you see my whole awful desktop or just my thing?
I can see both.
Anyway, it's cool. So I don't need to do it.
Was it on, you just searched it?
Yeah, I just searched it. It's the trough.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I'm on it.
This is why you gotta have a friend who's known you for 14 years. So yeah, I did my BFA show around souvenirs. So Cal's gonna find a picture of the trough. I don't have a ton of them, but I made a 13-foot trough that was full of 3,000 cast ceramic horses in really bright colors. And it was called 99 cents. Here it is. There we go. So this is our trough. And
I don't know where this is going. Sorry. It's going. There we go.
Anyway, it's called 99 cents. And all of those inside are cast ceramic horses. And so I cast 3,000 of them, and I wanted them all to be little souvenirs, and I wanted you to be able to take them. And so at the show, there was a little box on the thing that said 99 cents, and you could put 99 cents in there or $1 in there and take a horse. And I had it in my head as like a static piece, but then once people started actually taking them and getting souvenirs from the show, sound became so much a part of it, and people were like grabbing one and taking a picture with it, and that became so much a part of it. And so like that really got me thinking differently in the way of souvenirs and things. The thing I also learned about this work was that it kind of kept me a little bit distant from the work, because I was really freaked out to put myself that far in the work. So talking about souvenir rather than talking about my own stories or the types of stories that are important to me was like a good distance. I also did those souvenir shot glasses on the wall, which all have gold lustered cowboys on them. Cal, do you want to bring me back? Woot. Cool. See, we can find workarounds. This is what I do for my job. I just find workarounds because I'm not actually good at tech. So yeah, I did that. And then after school, I was really lucky and I got to go to Penland School of Craft. And I had an amazing teacher there for a 2-week session, Tetsuya Yamada. And he taught a class about narrative artwork. And he is a ceramic artist, but the way that he thinks about ceramics is very different than the way that I had before. And he's very much mixed media. And he really thinks about the pieces having conversations with each other rather than as standalone things. And all, so the first night of that class, first days of classes are great. that's the stuff that I'm like, the first day of a class, I'm just like, oh my God, give it all to me. But the first day of that class, Tetsuya took us outside and gathered us all around and talked to us about like what we thought stories were. And then he set a paper on the table, or a notebook on the table. And he said, okay, what's the story with this? And so we all talked about like, oh, somebody left their notebook, or you're in a classroom or something like that. And then you put a pin on the notebook. Okay, now what's the story? And so what we're learning is, you know, how those objects communicate with each other and how we insert ourselves in with those objects. And so then he's like, okay. And then he takes the pin away and he puts a traffic cone on the table. And he's like, all right, now what's the story? And there's the story that you don't quite get. And that's a little bit more like the stories that you find within artifacts and things, where things are out of context and they don't quite mesh together with the way that we think of the world. And so I got really super stoked about those stories. And so I started making work in the way that I still am making work in theory when I make work, where I would make things, I would kind of get an idea in my head or an object in my head. Recently, it's been a cactus. And by recently, I mean like for the last 7 years. Because I grew up in Wyoming and I am a desert creature, and I loved tooling around in the desert with my grandma, and I always loved the prickly pear cactus. And so I started drawing those and then simplifying those shapes into like a closed form that kind of just had the outline of a cactus. And then I started simplifying that into an arch. So the arches that you see are those. Cal, did you like make a new tab, or did you just share this thing? Let's see. Ooh, I know where I can do it.
Oh, I have 2 separate windows.
Yeah, I do too. I think I have too many windows. I think that's the problem. Here, I'm gonna open up this one because I actually do have the Gestalt show up. Gestalt. Anyway, so I started with a form, a pretty simple form. And then I started just making it over and over in lots of different media. And so I draw it, I'd make it out of paper, I would make it out of ceramics, I would make it out of clay and then draw on it. I made some vellum pieces. So that all started with the arch form. And then I got really into the repetitive movements. And so I did that. The last show I did actually before this was at Karen Dunbar's place out in Grable. It's called Repetition Compulsion. And it was all arches. So this one I brought in some other forms. They've got some things that are really simplified and some things that are really not. But I really like the idea of taking those forms out of context and the negative spaces, like the negative spaces that I saw in that archaeological dig. So, okay, I did find this and I do know how to share it. So I'm gonna do that. So yeah, I can talk a little bit about this work and where I'm at right now. Is it on there, Cal?
Mm-hmm. Yep, it's there.
Cool, yay, life is good. So yeah, these are the arches that I started with. And these actually are very similar forms to some things that I did for Repetition Compulsion a few years ago. And so these are all coil built. And then I took those forms, and that's gonna be Cal's piece. I took those forms and started doing some cut paper pieces, which is something that I've done in the past. And you know, when we realized that I wasn't going to be able to do all ceramics because we weren't going to be able to have access to the same tools that we did, I had done a lot of cut paper. I did some for my VFA show, and I did a lot between leaving school and residencies because I never had my own kiln. So yeah, I started doing some layered stuff like that. And I started with the same arch and just started cutting the arch in different ways to see what would come out of it and then how it happens when I layer it up. And this piece is a lot more like actively decorated, I guess, and like it's got all the ornamentation and things. But when you look at the piece, I'll bring it over here in a little bit, but it's made with coils, and it's still that very repetitive movement, and it's still the same technique that I learned with Walter in that first class. It's all just like pinching over and over and over. And I like to leave the fingerprints, and a lot of the marks in this piece, if you get up close to it, are that similar kind of arch. But then I also did add in the other layer of the flowers because I really like way too overly ornamented things. And I'm trying to figure out how to bring those two things together. So here's some cut paper that brings in the flower form as well. And this is kind of the direction that I want to go, actually, is these more archaeological type pieces. So you've got things that you recognize and things that you don't recognize, displayed in a way where they ought to have a function, but you need to kind of make up the narrative of what that function is going to be. So that's kind of the direction I'm going right now, and we will see what happens with it. But I really like that piece. And I don't think I would have made that piece if we had been able to do things in the way that we were intending to. Do I have more pieces in here? I can't remember. Oh, yeah. Oh, so Cal was talking a little bit about the bud vases. So these are plaster, and I love plaster. And when I was in college, I actually worked for an artist who makes ceramics, Heather May Erickson. I've got a piece right here. Oh, wait, you can't see it. Never mind, I'll show you later. I worked for this artist, Heather May Erickson, who makes really amazing ceramic work that is slip cast. And so she makes her forms out of plaster, then makes a mold out of plaster, and then casts liquid clay in it. And so you come out with a ceramic piece, but you start with a plaster form. And so I had done a lot of plaster work in college for her and my own work. And I love it. And I love mold making. And it's always this really great engineering problem. And I happened to have like 200 pounds of plaster at my house because I was thinking of making molds, making like press molds and sprig molds for the work that I was going to make, kind of like that last piece, the big vase with the flowers on it, where I could make really decorative elements to put on. And then I was like, well, it doesn't have to be a clay piece. It could just be a plaster piece. So the initial intention was to make these big, here, let me get out of this, so that you can see my hand gestures, because it is important. Wait, where am I? Oh, stop sharing. There we go. You'd think I worked in this industry or something. Anyway, so yeah, I wanted to make these big plaster pieces that had that same kind of art shape, but I wanted them to have spaces within them. So kind of like those cut pieces, I wanted it to look like a ceramic piece that was one of those cut pieces. So you'd have this big arch form with arches inside of it. So I sewed them, and I also love the look of fabric. So I sewed these pieces and then was going to pour the plaster into them. Well, the way that I sewed them was not ideal. And I made the spaces too small for the plaster to flow through when it was as thick as it needed to be, because if you make it thinner, then it comes out of where you sewed it because there's spaces in there. So it fell apart and it was horrible, and I was really upset because I was super stoked about these pieces. And then I took the mold apart, and all the spaces in between where the actual form was supposed to be had formed these really cool little sculptures that are only about this big. And I actually have that one right here, so you can see how big it is. But you know, I always work with negative space anyway, and these were the negative spaces that came out of that really cool idea I had that I've actually been thinking about for a really long time. So I decided to just do something with the negative spaces and kind of pull that arch form out and then add some of the decoration that I'm putting on my pots to it. So got these guys. Yeah, so I think that's most of the work from the show. If there's specific pieces you're interested in, I am happy to show you at any point. But yeah, I'm gonna hop back over to YouTube so I can see if anybody has any questions. And then I think we're gonna do some demos here.
Yeah, and we'd love to answer any questions that you all have if you are able to on the live stream. We'd love to answer anything. But I was gonna say the large coil pot that you made. It really looks like your work, like from Northwest. I don't know why, but like the texture and stuff. And I remember vividly you showing me that sketch of that that piece that you wanted to make with the pots, and you're like, look, it looks like pots, and I'm gonna make it out of pots. And I was like, oh my god, that's so cool. But it really, I was thinking about it the other day when I was looking at that pot. I'm like, oh my god, it's like those pieces that Brandy was trying to make.
It totally does, and it's the same scale too. I'll get it.
Yeah.
It's hard to see. That's the thing about not having a show in person. It's hard to see scale, but it's the same scale as the ones I was making.
Yes.
Elaine is here. She commented, "Hey, Elaine, doesn't it look the same?" Yeah. So that's awesome. I love that you pointed that out because it really is. I keep going. Another thing that Walter told me, this guy whose class I took, was that he's been making work since he was 16 years old, and he's been making the same piece since he was 16 years old. It's like he makes it in different ways, different mediums. It looks different, but he's been making the same piece since he was 16. It's kind of the same thing. We're all trying to figure the same darn thing out. Did you see I didn't cuss there? I didn't cuss. Ha.
We're supposed to, kind of.
What am I at? I think I'm at 4 now. I think you missed one, Aaron.
I have one, right? Or more? Do I have more?
One, I think. We've got this 20-minute lag, or 20-second lag. Thank goodness it's not a 20-minute lag. We've got this 20-second lag here. So, yeah. We'll
wait
see.
for it to catch up.
We'll see here in a second how many dollars. But seriously, I have to donate more than $4. And yeah, if you missed that part, again, I know probably a lot of you have been here the whole time, but if you just popped in, we have a game going on to go along with our show. So everything in the show is available. Oh, my hooter drums. Oh my gosh, Elaine, I forgot about those.
Yeah. I did projects with kids based on that. Did I ever tell you about that?
No.
Yeah, when I was traveling to one classroom schools, we would make little drums based on those pieces.
That is so cool. I had no idea.
So yeah, Brandy's up to $4 and I'm up to $1 for cussing.
Okay. So yes, if we curse, then we're donating an extra $1 to charity. All the money that we're making off of the show, we're not going to keep. Half of it is going to Gestalt to support local art centers like Gestalt need your help right now, and they are doing amazing things and bringing things like this to y'all while you can't be there in person and where we can't have a show. So all of the Callie, seriously, just one, you're so much better at this than me. I guess you see more kids than I do.
I taught little kids, so I had to keep from cussing. So
anyway,
have a good
anything that
censor.
you buy from the show is going to be split 50-50 between Gestalt and Partners in Health, which is an amazing organization that I work with at my current job. And every time that we curse, we are donating an extra $1. So surely I can donate more than $4 extra. Anyway, shall we get started on some demos?
Sure. And again, you guys can ask us questions as we go, and we'll probably be able to pay attention more and answer. So
yeah, I don't see any questions yet, but we both got the YouTube chat up, and I know there's a 20-second lag. So if I don't answer your question right away, we will certainly do it within about a minute of it popping up. But we'll get started to do some demos. Ooh, what do we got? Oh, that's a great question. So Michael says, would any of the work be different for the exhibition if there wasn't a forced or voluntary isolation? Has the isolation made it easier or more interesting? And also, I have never heard Callie curse ever.
Whatever.
That's not true.
So this is Michael, but this is Tony, who I went to grad school with. Did you meet him?
Tony! Hi, Tony. I know you.
I think it would be completely different. I think, like I said before, I would have been up in the print shop and Tony, you remember me, my first year. I would have been in the print shop up until my show, changing and layering and doing different things. And I think I don't think I would have any drawings at all, even though I'm really enjoying that bit of it. But yeah.
I was so excited when you said you were doing drawings, because I was wondering if you're going to, but you're always drawing. So it's always weird for me to see a show with no drawings, and your master's show had drawings in it. So
yes, that's true. Oh, that's true. Yep, that's very true. I think I forget.
All right. Yeah, my work would have been very different as well. I was actually, so what I was planning to do for this show was a few more of those big vase pieces. I've got one outside. But then I was making some sculptures where it would be all sections. I don't have a big kiln here. I really like to work big. But the kiln here is pretty small. So I was gonna make sections like this big, and add them up and make kind of totems. But make the totems out of things that didn't quite really go together. Make pinch forms and some really smooth forms and things like that. And that like referenced the human form and referenced objects, but weren't necessarily going that direction, which would have been fun. And I might try it at some point, but honestly, I really like that I kind of got thrown back into this weird negative space thing. And I'm excited to go that way a little bit. I also really want to make those, really want to make those plaster cast cactus work. Plaster cast cactus. So we'll see.
Yeah,
I don't know. I didn't think I was going to keep making work after this, but I am. So
when we talked about this was kind of a way to keep us working, right? To get us working and get us going. And I think it definitely did that. And then, but yeah, we definitely did have to change how we were working. I definitely had to change my scale a bit for sure, for what I could work on at home or adjust. And yeah, and then I also normally when I do show work, how it's displayed is just as important as the work itself. So usually I have a lot of found wood and found objects that are kind of displaying the piece. And I think that was kind of cut out of the show because of what's going on and what's happening. So yeah.
Yeah, my scale went way down too, because I also store my work at the Clay Studio in Missoula. So I live in a studio apartment and paper stores a lot.
Your apartment's small. Yeah.
But it's great. Okay, so we got that question. And Elaine wants to know what tool I'm using for my paper cuttings. It is an X-Acto blade. It's my favorite tool for both paper and for clay. I can't live without an X-Acto blade. But it's the nice kind with the silicone squishy bit on it so that it doesn't hurt so bad. Vaughn says, what kind of creative difficulties did you face creating a show in the quarantine era? And do you see remote shows like this becoming more popular in the future? Yeah. I mean, yes, I did see difficulties, totally. It's just, especially because my work so much, like I set things up so they talk to each other, and I want, like, what I'm looking for is to develop a narrative with the viewer and the other pieces, and I like to make work that kind of references the human form, the scale of the human form, or the scale of like hand tools that you would use. So like, I want you to feel like you should pick that up or can pick it up or do pick it up. And I want you to like, to ask those questions. And then I want the work to ask those questions of each other. And that is a really hard thing to do when you see just pictures of it on a white background. And it was also interesting because it a little bit, that worked out really well though, because Callie and I had also kind of worked that way, not intentionally, but like I didn't see any of the work that Cal was putting in the show beforehand. Yeah. We didn't get to set up together. We weren't like talking through, okay, this is going to go here. This is going to go here. How is this going to talk? Like we saw the space. I mean, obviously we've seen the space, but we went to the space together and talked about how to lay it out, but neither of us had seen what the other one was working on. So we did get a little bit of that coming through in the show, which was kind of fun. And our work really does talk to each other pretty well. I think I'm really excited to do it in person.
Yeah.
But I think
that was like lot of like trust on each other that we knew it was going to go together. I mean, just like how we knew our favorite songs and the Punch Brother was going to be the same. We knew it was going to, you know, go together well.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, that was good. And then I do see this becoming popular in the future, not necessarily for quarantine reasons, just I guess I shouldn't say that. Like things like this are popular. Like I've seen a lot of shows that are like this. I've seen a lot of artist talks with people who can't be at the show. One of my favorite pieces, actually, I can't remember the name of it right now, but there was this really amazing show by a bunch of Pakistani artists living in diaspora, and they all were miniature painters, and they all did like an exquisite corpse thing and sent paintings to each other and then edited them. And then the show ended up, none of them were at the show, but the show got hung with all the work that they had made collaboratively, but they never talked to each other about it. Like they just sent each other the things, and you changed or added or did whatever, and then they got hung. And that's one of my favorite shows. And they did digital talks and things like that, but they never were in the space together. And so it's a thing that has happened before. I've been out of the art scene for a minute, so you probably know better than me, Callie, like how regular this is, but I've seen a ton of galleries doing it lately, and I think it's a thing people will keep doing.
I think like what I was saying at the beginning of our talk about how this has expanded our community, how Brandy and I were so excited to show in our community, but now it's a bummer that we can't show at Gestalt and be with our friends and family, but it has expanded immensely, you know, and I think that we would be silly not to think about using different methods of allowing different people from across the country to kind of come in. So I do think that like different galleries and different museums and places will start to really, you know, they're going to see that people have a lot of interest because it's out there, it's easy for them to take part. And I have a strong philosophy that you should bring your artwork to people. You shouldn't expect people to come to you. So like when I had my MA at the University of Dallas, it had to be on campus, and I made sure that it was up where students were, and it was easy. It was very, very easy for them to come in and see my work. So with museums putting collections online, with Gestalt putting us up and doing our artist talk for all of you to see, it's making it so very easy for you to see and experience art. You don't have to leave your house, you can just see it. But maybe, hopefully, you will then, when you have the opportunity, get out and go and see the artwork and appreciate it as much as you can.
Totally. Yeah, I didn't think about that, Cal, but this actually, I'm going to start setting up because I got clay stuff. But this actually is like a really good format for your work specifically. I remember when you first went to Dallas, like your first semester, you were talking about, like, just thinking about how the show was going to end up. And you had just come off of teaching in all of these different schools, and like that's really the direction you were kind of headed. And I remember us talking about wanting to do a museum show with all the artwork at child's height, and like bringing the artwork like physically to the place where those people were, so that they could see it at their height and experience it in that way. And like, you know, right now this is where we all are, and this is so cool.
Yeah, and I think working at a museum and working with kids, but also working in a community that supported the museum. So talking about Miles City, where I was working at before I went to grad school, there was support from the community, but it was also not a lot of support. And so trying to get the kids interested and feel like they're a part of something that maybe when they're grown up, they wouldn't feel like they're a part of. So if I did, I would always have a show for the kids that was at their height. And it would drive everyone nuts because it's way too low. But it's like, well, it's not about you, it's about the kids. And it's to make them feel like this space is theirs, and this is where they feel comfortable. They should feel comfortable here, so that when they grow up, when they go into an art museum or a different place like that, they do feel comfortable. And I do think that that's a thing, like people still go to art museums. People feel comfortable going to art museums. But I do think it's helpful to do that, to help people feel like this is their space.
Well, I think it can be such a hard space as well to find an entrance to if you're not already involved in the arts or something creative, or, you know, if you parents aren't doing that kind of thing. Like, I think most people that I meet, just like walking down the street, if they weren't exposed to the arts as a child or when they were like teenagers or something, you're not gonna find them in a museum because they feel like it's not for them. So like being able to bring art to spaces where people feel comfortable, where they feel like they have an entrance, like whether that is on YouTube or Instagram or site-specific things like you did with your MFA show or things like that, is so important.
Yes. So just to tell you, since you're away from the computer, Erin says that she's loving the format that this is, that what we're working with, and she may use it in future shows.
That'd be awesome.
Yeah, and then Erin says, I believe it extends the reach of the art, and in that sense, I really enjoy it as well. But Elaine said, agreed, this mode may even provide opportunities for even more people to see the work, if not experience the work in person, which is, I completely agree. And yeah, and I think what we're seeing a lot of is different museums and places, like not just visual art, but like different musicals or different music is being put online for people to experience because everyone is stuck at home. And I think that that's really wonderful, because I don't know if it will continue when we go back to normal or whatever normal is after this. But I do think that it shows how much people want art in their lives and how excited they are to have it, which is really wonderful.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I'm all for any method to expand the medium, any method to get creativity into people's hands. Like, I am all for.
So Caleb from Northwest
Caleb!
has a question. Yeah.
Oh,
You want me to read it to you? So he says, hi, Brandy and Callie. It's really great to see you both. Brandy, I'm curious about how you're thinking about ornamentation and its role in storytelling through your objects.
I haven't all the way thought through that. That's not an acceptable answer, Caleb. I think it's still something that I'm trying to figure out, because I've always been really drawn to way too ornamented objects. Like, I love stuff on stuff kind of things. I love, like, if you know the ceramic artist, Sunkuya. Is it Sunkuya? Yeah, Sunkuya. He makes work about like Korean mythology, and it's just figures on figures, and they're huge. And glazes on top of glazes, and that is the like type of work that I've always really been drawn to, which is funny because I used to try and make these really heckin' perfect things with no stuff on them. So I think part of it's just like a natural proclivity. I like that kind of thing. I like the feeling of too much, and it feels a little bit to me like the whole process of making multiples or making pinched work. It's very repetitive, and I find a lot of comfort in that. So part of it's less about the ornamentation, more about the comfort in the repetitiveness. Where else was I thinking with that? Read your question again. Caleb, ornamentation, role in storytelling. Oh, the role in storytelling. The other thing that I've been thinking about with ornamentation recently, I haven't made much work recently, and I haven't thought that terribly much about it, but I have been thinking about like the ornamentation that I found on my pots when I was an archaeologist, and like how indicative those things are of specific cultures, and the ways that like you can really pinpoint time periods or things by the ornamentation that you find on the pots or on the artifacts and things like that, and that helps tell the story. That isn't a thing I think I'm doing with my work, or at least if I am, I'm not doing it effectively, but it's a thing that I would like to be doing effectively. And I think that's as far as I've thought through it. So I hope that's an okay answer. Also, hi, Caleb, I miss you. What are you working?
Erin said, oh, what's that?
What are you working on?
I'm trying to set up these drawings. So Erin, I think Erin she said that people have been coming in because they saw the pieces online and wanted to see them in person, but it's expanded the audience. Yeah.
Oh, that's really cool. We're definitely going to do it in person. Here I am signing us up for another show at your place, Erin, but we're definitely going to do a show in person. We've been talking about this already. So I am working on a pinched piece that's going to be similar to the one that I was talking about having done at Alfred. And I want to make, these are things that I've kind of going back to a lot of things that I worked on a long time ago, partly because it's a familiar place for my hands while I try and figure out what I'm making. So long while back, I think I might have even done some of this at Northwest, but was making these like artifacts that didn't have a use and that were like not the right size to have been artifacts, but were like definitely handmade. And I mean, it's not like original or anything. I see a lot of people doing this, but that's what I'm making. So I'm starting with a flat space. So I want this object to not have any flat spaces on it. So I'm starting here. Here we go. We'll see if this works. With an outline of what I want, I'm going to build the whole thing into a closed form, and then I'm going to flip it and build the other side. So there won't be any flat sides to it. And I think this is going to hang because I like things that hang.
Sculpture again.
What are you working on?
So let's see if it shows up. Okay, so I have this drawing. So like I said before, I'm obsessed with my plants now because I've become the plant lady. But I'm so again, drawing kind of what's around me, and I love these plants and I love how they look. And so I'm kind of thinking about drawing them as they're growing and as they kind of change over time. So this is one that I started before. And do you remember with John at Northwest and drawing one when we would do what was it, like the morphing one where something would change as it would progress back in the composition? So I thought it'd be kind of cool to kind of do another one, because this was from a few weeks ago, do another one and see if it's changed. But as they move, as the plants move and change, maybe they'll change in the drawing as well. So yeah.
Okay, so I'm coil building. I'm trying to like explain a little bit what I'm doing. If you are not a potter, coil building. So I like really thick coils, and I generally just do it this way. And then I'm just drawing with the clay, I guess, making the line of what I want, and then I'm just gonna pinch it so that it's all even. This clay is really short. I haven't worked with this clay yet. I usually do red clay, but I decided to get some white for some reason. And this is all the clay I have left in my house. So we're doing that.
So Erin just asked me if my plants have names. Yes. So the plant that I just showed, this one, is a Hoya plant, and its name is Ahoya. I also have a aloe plant named Aloe. So, and then I also have one named Betty, but that's about all of them that I've named. So unless they're puns, I may not have an interest in naming them, I guess. Except Betty. Oh, and Hippo Ears is another one that my sister named, because when I bought it in Dallas, it's a peperomia plant, and it has little curved ears like a hippo plant, or like a hippo.
Hippo plant.
But so like a hippo plant, you know. But so it's Hippo Ears.
I love hippo plant. Long live the plant ladies, says Vaughn. Yeah, I'm trying to be a plant lady. Callie's really good at being a plant lady. Plants die when I walk into a room, so I'm trying really hard. But I have gotten way into gardening lately, so that's what we're doing. I'm trying to like not just be all in front of the camera while I do this, but we'll see.
Well, and we will be doing demos on Instagram, so hopefully we'll you can see more there. But yeah, I think kind of trying to figure out how you can see what I'm doing. I'm hoping to carve during those ones, so if you're interested in how I actually make my wood blocks, I can show on those ones. But yeah.
Yeah, so we'll be doing demos Saturday the 16th and Saturday the 30th. I think those are the right dates. One of us will do one of them, one of us will do the other one. And if you are new here and haven't seen yet, the pieces that we're making are going to be auctioned off at the end, and half the proceeds will go to Gestalt and half the proceeds will go to Partners in Health. So yeah. So now we have incentive to get these done during your demos. I'm hoping, I would really like my demo to be a surface demo, because I really like doing an unfired surface and like terra sigillatas and things like that, which if you're not a potter, like typically when you make pots, like in your classes and things, you're gonna use glazes, or like anything that's functional, you're gonna use glazes. And I've always had a really hard time understanding glaze. Like I understand it chemically just fine. I just don't understand like how to make it look the way I want to. And so I got really into terra sig, which is it's a clay rather than a glaze. Glaze is going to be predominantly glass. If you guys get sick of the chemistry talk, just tell me to stop. Clay and glaze are made out of basically the same thing, except there's more glass in glaze and there's more non-melting things in clay. But they all have the same kind of things in them, which is why clay turns into ceramic and film. But you can take clay and you can kind of filter out just the finest particles, and that is terra sigillata. And when you put that on a bone dry, like a dry clay piece or a fired clay piece with no glaze on it, it absorbs in, and clay is made of these little platelets. And so when they smoosh together real close, they get a little bit of waxy and shiny. And since it's just the finest particles, they can get really nice and close. And so you get this pretty, like not high gloss, but waxy kind of feel. And you can, it's a little bit transparent, so you can use it like watercolor, which is the only kind of painting that I was ever like really quite made sense to me was watercolor. So, and I like the layers of it and being able to see the marks through it, because I really been very drawn to like the marks you make with clay. So yeah, I'm hoping to do a Sig demo, but also some unfired surface things, because I know everybody's at home and most people don't have kilns, including me. And so it's cool to see what you can do without glaze and without Sig and without anything that has to be actually baked onto your pot. And yeah, there's lots of different ways to make things. Not all food safe ways to make things, but there's lots of ways to make things. All right, y'all. Feeling like it's pretty valid, but you know, those things are. Let's see. Let's fix this. Let's make it less so. What? We're gonna go with it. Like that. Okay. Cool. Do you guys have any other questions? I don't want to just like sit here and curse more. Fuck. Crowdsource the planet. Okay. No, I'm great naming things. I'm not crowdsourcing my plant names. I'm great at naming things. So are you using any, is the sketch that you're making going to become a woodblock, Cal?
I think it might. Yeah, I think with this, I'm trying to figure out how to show it because I don't know if drawing was a great thing, but yeah, so I think the one that I'm working on here, so this guy, I think I'm just going to kind of work out the different lines that I'll add to the wood block. Okay. And then you can kind of see where I'm adding some hatch marks and kind of play around with that. And then, yeah, I think this will go onto the wood block. Cool. Which is not normally how I work at all. What's that? Usually it's not normally how I work at all ever. I usually draw right onto the block, but I thought I'd change it up this time.
So yeah, how does that process usually work for you when you're doing a wood block? Like, how do you kind of work through that drawing and get it to where it's going to go?
Usually I just grab the block that I'm going to use and I'll just draw from there. Having Mark Ritchie as a professor at UW, he would always talk about like how the drawing has a lot of energy, and he draws wild horses in Wyoming, and he'll actually go out with his 4x4 wood blocks and draw them out in the field. And I think there's something to that. Like, I think whenever I do kind of draw before I go to my wood block, it seems, or try to transfer a drawing from my sketchbook to my wood block, it can kind of feel a little stiff. And so sometimes I'll just work and kind of problem solve on the block. But with this one, I think I might kind of play around with like the object itself and kind of manipulate it and play with it on the block. So almost having, like, I might cut it out like a stencil and have it repeated on the block and use that same piece, if that makes sense. But still playing around, so it's not as structured, still kind of playing around with it.
So like repeat that design on the block and then carve the block, rather than like carving a block and then having that repeated on the paper.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so they're different in very subtle ways. Just like looking at the plant, it's going to be different just a little bit every day that you look at it. So we'll see if it works out. We'll try it out on my demo day.
It's so short, you guys. Sweet. Okay, so I've got I promise this will not be this phallic when it's done, but I've got my outline, so I'm gonna start building up layers of clay. I want to make sure that all the seams are real tight. So I've got my little serrated rib from Cheryl Tools. I love mud tools. And I'm just gonna kind of finesse form and make sure that it's all nice and put together. I don't ever slip and score things. It's probably bad, but I don't. So I just like really go at it with this rib. Cool. So we'll start there. And yeah, I'm thinking about these in like this not being the only one. Like I would love to see multiple of these hung up on a wall. So we'll see how much time I have and if I get access to a kiln at any point, and see if I can make more than one. But there will at least be one. Does anybody else have any questions? I mean, Callie and I, she because she has a master's degree, and me because I have a job where I have to talk a lot, can talk all day. So it's fine if you don't. We'll just talk.
And we have how much time left? We have about 45 minutes that the opening goes until, so you can really ask us anything if you have anything.
We got 12 people watching. Let's do it. Get the donation numbers up, y'all people. Yeah, so I guess Oh yeah, there's a 20-second delay. So maybe y'all will be thinking of questions, but I'm going to talk a little bit more because I know not everybody was here at the very beginning about the charities, why we're putting donations where we're going, or where we are. And we talked a lot in the beginning, and it's super, super important. Community art centers are such an amazing place, and so much of what Callie and I have gotten, and just you can so much of what the two of us and what a lot of people get out of the arts is the amazing community around it, especially within clay and print, because they're not always mediums that you can do just on your own in your own studio, and they really rely a lot on community. And there are these spaces where you can have a lot of that, and so community art centers that support that and support developing artists and help them get where they're going are such an important part of any town or any community. And this has been real hard on everybody, partly financially, but partly just because, you know, those places are based around people gathering together. And there's, you know, it's great when we can move these places online and continue to have a space where that can happen. So we definitely want to support Gestalt financially. And if you can and want to buy gift cards online, buy work, if you are not from here, support your local community art center. They're amazing places. Like I said, like the only reason I get to use kilns is because we've got a great clay center here in Missoula, and I ran a clay center for a while. So yeah. And then Partners in Health, the other organization that we're supporting, is an organization that brings healthcare to the world's poorest families. And I found out about them through another community. Cal, I was thinking today, here's a tangent for you. You are also probably the reason I have my job. Yes, you gave me paper towels. And I had never listened to or watched the Vlogbrothers or done anything Nerd Fighter related until you gave me paper towns. And I read it, and I was like, oh, these people are cool. And now I work there.
I was obsessed with SciShow and Mental Floss, and
yeah.
then I found out that he was an author, and yeah.
And so we
crazy
part of this community, Nerd Fighteria, and I work for DFTBA, which does the merchandise and is owned by the same person. And we work really closely with Partners in Health. So that's where I found out about them. And they're an awesome organization, and they work all over the world. They're based in Boston, and they're like really leading the charge on testing and tracing for COVID-19 right now. So we really want to help out where we can with that. And we also, the portion of Partners in Health that the company I work for is supporting is the Sierra Leone Fund. We don't have a better name for it yet, but we are building maternity wards in West Africa, in Sierra Leone, where the maternal mortality rate is 1 in 17. And so we're working to drastically reduce maternal and childhood mortality. So if you buy pieces, that's where it's going. And if you want to support either of those organizations, outside of buying pieces, if you don't like the stuff or you don't have money for the stuff or whatever, there are places to donate online. You can buy gift cards to your local community centers. If you don't have the money at all, that's totally cool. Everybody is in really bad financial positions right now. And so, you know, send people that direction. If you know people, tell them what a cool place Gestalt is. And yeah, and there are resources online for Partners in Health if you're interested in looking into that. But thought I'd give a recap in case anybody's new and missed that spiel at the beginning.
So Tony asked us, what's the most important tool item you have in your home studio currently?
Oh God. You go first.
I'll start. These bad boys that were a birthday present from my sister and sister-in-law. Yeah, came from Gestalt. So, because usually a press is the best tool that I can have around me. But yeah, that and my carving tools, which are not with me right now. But yeah, having these just pencils, and I love pencils and pens, and so having those now is probably very vital. But yeah, those are my carving tools for sure, keeping me going right now. And also, I have to say, this guy, this eraser, it's like an eraser pen, is the best thing ever.
Trying to find mine. It's my X-Acto knife. We're talking about actual tools. Actually, the most important tool I have right now is my computer, because I would be going absolutely insane without it. And here's my clay X-Acto knife. I don't know where I put my paper X-Acto knife. This one's gross. This is a real X-Acto. The paper one is really nice with a cushy handle. And it's not gross. Pro tip, don't use your clay X-Acto knife on paper. Clay ruins it. But yeah, actually my most important tool is my computer. I don't have access to libraries to research imagery right now, and yeah, that's where I get my music and all my things and all the images I need and talk to Cal.
My sister also just asked if wine is a very important tool, and yes, the dry rosé Bada box is like the real MVP of COVID-19 right now for me. So.
I didn't stock up on wine before this happened, but I did right before I was here. I was on vacation with my mom, and I stocked up on rum. So I've got the rum. Wine is an excellent tool. Was it?
It's very important.
Were you in that demo with me at Red Lodge with, who was it? I feel like it was when, Elaine, your teacher, this guy, Chuck Hines. I feel like it was when Chuck Hines was there, where somebody asked him what his most important tool was, and he said a shot of whiskey.
It's kind of true, though. I think that Mark used to say,
yeah.
Mark used to say that, like, well, he would relate it to art making, but he would say that art making is like drinking. You need to know when to stop. But I think like just like sometimes just sitting down and drawing, I can't really drink when I'm carving. I think that's a very bad idea, right? Or when I'm using a press, I can't really drink because, again, horrible idea. But when I'm drawing on a wood block, just like some wine just to relax and kind of get you in the headspace of being, I don't want to say inspired, but like feeling creative, I guess, kind of, it helps. And then do you remember when we were in watercolor class?
Like self-doubt bit, like it's hard to stop making work, man. It's hard to stop, and then it's hard to start up again. Like when I was making work every day, it was just like, oh, I have to do this thing. It's like brushing my teeth. And then I stopped making work for like years, and I had so much anxiety starting this again. So this is why Callie and I did this show, actually, because it was like a really low impact way for me to be like, no, this is an important part of my life, and for us to both keep making and building our portfolios and doing things. But it was like, okay, like I know these people. For me, I don't know for Cal, but for me, like I know these people. I love these people. They support me. They've seen me like through my whole artistic career. And so it's okay if I fall flat on my face in front of them, because they're going to like me anyway. Yeah. And they're going to tell me to keep doing it and kick my ass. And yeah, tell me that I'm being a baby if I stop. It's awesome.
I think that's such a thing with art making. And I think one of the benefits that I had in grad school, which I don't think everyone would have this experience, but like you just had to make, and make and make. And I think that and they wanted that to become our kind of our normal with art making, is that you just make it. And I think if I didn't have that, I would do a lot of starts and stops. And I mean, even in that environment, like in a grad school environment where you're just, you know, you're in a safe environment, you're making a ton of work, there were still times where I would just get kind of stuck and scared and not think it was good. And but I think it's good to.
There's something to having to, though. Like it was not anywhere near grad school experience, because I know a lot of people who went through grad school and like undergrad. Elaine, you always say that I'll just hand out those master's degree like they do bachelor's degrees, which is totally true.
I wish.
but yeah, undergrad too, though, for me, like I haven't been to grad school, but you were required, like, what were you gonna do if you got so stuck in your head, like, oh my God, I don't want to show this thing, or I don't want to make it, or I'm embarrassed, like, then you're gonna fail, and or you're not gonna have your show on time, or you're not gonna, there's something to having it be a requirement and having people looking over your shoulder. There's also something to having the people looking over your shoulder not necessarily be the people who are going to support you through anything, and just be like, hey, like, you got to get your shit together. I'm making money for you guys right now.
Well, and then I think also what we talked about, you were talking about this with Taos, but when you're in a job that is very creative and you're helping other people be creative, and then you go home, it's like the last thing you want is to continue on. So like, I think I listen to a lot of comedians like talk about how when they watch movies, they don't watch comedies, they watch drama, because they don't want to sit there and watch another person like and try to figure out how they're doing their comedy. And I feel like it's like when you are in a job where creativity is so many different things, but when you get home, you kind of need a bit of a break, but it's hard to get into your own creative thing.
Yeah, totally.
So Elaine asked, or I think she's asking, sorry if I missed it, if you talked about this already, but can you explain the path to finding your voice in your work? That's awesome. Was it through developing concepts or through the material?
Cal, you go.
Well, I mean, through amazing professors like Elaine, I really think that they help you find your voice. I was thinking about this a lot today. So going through my education up until University of Wyoming, I think that there were so many skill sets that were taught to me by my professors, and they were taught well, and they really cared. And it was very important. I think Northwest is very, very good at giving foundations to students and, making them feel confident and knowing that they can draw, or knowing that they can throw a pot or anything like that. And so I felt like when I left undergrad, I felt very confident in the skills that I had acquired there. But when I went to grad school, I felt like I really found my voice, because I felt, like I said before, the professors, and especially Stephen Fouch, my major professor, really, really helped me find what I really wanted to say, and made sure that I never got bored with it. And so I think it was definitely through professors that I found what I wanted to talk about, and given the tools to say it. So given the tools in undergrad and then in grad school, kind of finding what can I say with these tools. And with mine, I think printmakers, I think any craft medium, you really, really have to think about the material. And you really have to kind of, like, for me to use a certain type of paper is going to give, if I use one type of paper compared to a different type of paper, it's going to give different meaning to my pieces. So if I use, and this is just not to go too deep into something that I would need to explain, but to use a European paper that's really, really heavy and has structure, usually used for etching and different things like that, that's going to have a different feel, a different history than an Asian paper that's usually used for relief and is like, has a different texture. So a lot of times I'm using a lightweight Asian paper because it's very, very strong, but looks delicate. And I love that in my concept. And it's not something that is initially there, but I love that bit of it, that people come up to my work and they're afraid to touch it because it's very delicate, but it's actually stronger than most papers you would come across. They used to make armor out of paper. So it's very, very strong. And I like what that material does for the concept.
Totally. I love that. You've told me that before, that they used to make armor out of paper, and that is just the most fascinating, amazing thing to me. I love it.
That's secondhand knowledge from Mark Ritchie, so hopefully that's correct. I haven't researched it.
I am using it regardless. Yeah, I don't know. I often feel like I don't necessarily have a voice in my work, and then I see it all come together, and I guess I must. But I think I would agree with Callie that a lot of it is the people who I've been able to work with. Because, I mean, like I said, when I was in your class, Elaine, like, I was so gonna make functional pots, even though all I wanted to make was sculpture. and I didn't even know why I wanted to make the functional pots. And then like I went and like had other people, you who I didn't listen to, and then other people like, you're like, why are you making these? Like, it's cool if you want to make functional pots, but tell me why, and why are you making them sculptures? And like, it took an awful lot. I think it often takes an awful lot for us to get there, or at least it did for me. And I know on occasion it has for Cal. And like, so I think that having people who can be outside of you and outside of your concept and all the things that are going on in your head is super important. So that's part of it for me too. Yeah, clay, the material definitely shapes whatever voice I do have. I work really messy. I work really, but that might be it too. Like the material shapes it, but also like I have a way of working that I can't get out of regardless of what I want to make. Like, I mean, I'm a mess when I make stuff, and I've tried to make the really pretty porcelain things. Let me see. I don't know if this will work. I've tried to make the really pretty like porcelain stuff, and like, I'm just sloppy when I put things together, and my table's a mess, and I usually work in red clay, and it's, I think that has a lot to do with it. And no matter how hard I try to not be that person, like that's what comes across. So I think I kind of just like, at some point had to learn to embrace that. So I think the material and just my own messiness and scatteredness has a lot to do with like how I touch things and how the work ends up. But yeah, I don't know. Some days I feel like I have a voice in my work, and some days I don't. Which is about the way I feel about my head, so I guess that's fine.
I have a question for us. Since our show is titled by music, how does music, like, I mean, how does music play a part in either making or like thinking of your concept? Do you use music? Do you listen to music when you're working?
I don't listen to music when I'm working. How weird is that? I listen to podcasts.
I know.
I feel like
I'm split.
What's that?
I'm split. I listen to both at the same time. No.
Once in a while, I've been listening to a lot of Punch Brothers since we settled on a name for the show. So the last few pieces I made, I listened to a lot of Punch Brothers. But yeah, I get very emotionally attached to music, and I feel like it changes the way I work too much. I don't know, like, maybe that's weird, but I feel like the way that I'm feeling and the way it affects the way I'm touching the clay, and I need that to be consistent. And if I listen to music, it doesn't stay consistent for me. Weirdly enough, it does with podcasts. I don't know why.
Well, I'll listen to music when I'm printing because it's like active. You're up and you're moving. But I'll listen to podcasts when I need to stay focused on carving because it keeps me still because I want to be up and moving. So it's like music will keep me moving if I want to sit down, and it keeps me printing. But yeah, but what about, so do you think about music and how you're making your stuff, or like when you're listening to music, do you ever get inspired to make
definitely
something?
get inspired by music. Less so. Yeah, I'm like a very auditory kind of person, and so I get inspired by music. I get inspired by sounds in general. Like, being outside in Montana sounds and being downtown in city sounds and all of that. Weirdly enough, it's also like not so much the story of the music that inspires me, which is weird because I feel like, you know, so much of my work is about story that it's less of the lyrics and the story and more just the more visceral feelings I get from music. But I do definitely get inspired by it. How about you?
Oh, for sure. And I think especially when it's kind of almost after I make the piece and the music that I've been listening to as I've been working on it, like I'll go back and listen to the lyrics and kind of pull from the vocabulary, and it's like, oh, this is what I'm trying to say. This is kind of, but then also it can happen with podcasts too. Some of the work in my MFA was kind of like oddly dark, and I had been listening to like a lot of podcasts on World War II. So it's like this kind of like they can affect you just as much, I think, too. But Vaughn asked us what our favorite podcast at the moment is.
Oh, what is it? You have 6 more hours? I'm a junkie, man. You know this. I am a junkie. Yeah. What is my favorite podcast at the moment? My favorite podcast, this is another thing. Callie and I have very similar tastes in podcasts, and we both love My Favorite Murder, like, so much. Another thing that Callie turned me on to, you almost always turn me on to the media that I like. Now I get some of it through work, because a lot of the people I like.
You do, to me as well.
Yeah, oh, that's funny. Now, like, I get a lot of it from work now because a lot of the people I listen to are my clients. But yeah, before, like, I learned about My Favorite Murder from Callie, and it's amazing. And we went and saw a live show for her graduation, and it was super heckin' cool.
Yeah.
And speaking of sloppy, this is sloppy. So My Favorite Murder, the last week I've been listening to an Acquired Taste podcast, which is other clients of mine, and it's just these 2 girls who, they kind of remind me of Karen and Georgia from My Favorite Murder. Like, they are just 2 girls who are friends, and they talk to each other, and like, it has a big theme. Like, they'll each kind of tell a story, and often one of them is kind of like creepy and weird, but it's like a news story or something that's going on in the world, and then one of them will do something a little more lighthearted. And I really just, like, I've listened to them for work, but I really started getting super into them in the last couple of weeks because it's just nice. It's another one of those connection things. It's nice to just feel like you're having a conversation with friends when you can't necessarily be like sitting down having a conversation with friends. And it feels a lot like my relationships with some of my friends. Although lately it's been really sad, but that not my relationships with my friends, that podcast. But
Speaking of My Favorite Murder, I listened to their new one, and they said, they were joking around, and they said, yeah, we're your escape from all the chaos that's happening right now. And it's really sad that your escape is a murder podcast.
All right. That's so funny because Acquired Taste, they did one recently about how people use horror movies to navigate anxiety and like really horrible news stories and stuff to feel like more calm. And it was super funny, which is why I listened to My Favorite Murder. It makes me less anxious. Let's see.
So Vaughn asked me if I've listened to Dan Carlin's Ghost of the Ostfront, best podcast on World War II. No, but I listen to Dan Carlin a lot, and I really love his podcast on King of Kings. I think that's a really, really good one. But they're dense, so sometimes at work right now, I listen to podcasts all the time, and it's really, really great to help me stay focused, like I said before. So I'll have to check it out because that sounds really good. Yeah, I love My Favorite Murder. But I also love like Conan O'Brien's podcast right now is making me feel really good.
It's so good. Seriously.
Super funny. They're very quick, very funny, very lighthearted, and I think they're really, really nice right now. So I've been listening to those quite a bit.
They're so good. I love Conan O'Brien's podcast. I haven't listened in a few weeks, but it's awesome. What else is good?
And also Dax, one of my favorites is Dax Shepard's Armchair Expert. And he brings in a lot of celebrities because he's a celebrity. But when he brings in experts, like he'll bring in like psychiatrists, and I don't know, he brought in this coach one time, and it was one of the best podcasts I've ever heard on leadership in a long time. And I think that one's a really, really good one.
That's awesome. Yeah, you told me about Doc Shepard, and I have still yet to listen, but I'm going to have to. Another one that I love, which, okay, anybody who talks to me on a regular basis, it took me 2 hours and 40 minutes to turn the conversation to jiu-jitsu, but I listened to
We were 20 minutes from being done.
That's 20 minutes from being done. I did it. It is hard to turn a conversation where you're not in a room with somebody to jiu-jitsu. It really is. It's unfortunate. Anyway, I listen to the jiu-jitsu podcast, who is, he's this black belt out in Virginia, I think, and he's way good. I like him. But I've got like probably 100 podcasts on my list. I don't listen to them all regularly, but I listen to them all the time. Okay,
yeah. So. This is kind of a Debbie Downer, but I've been listening to a lot of the podcasts on the, I just had a blank, Exactly Right network so My Favorite Murder, the two women created a network. But there's a lot of podcasts on there that are talking about either missing women or Jane Does that were found, and using that network. So they're talking about these women or these murders that are unsolved. And a lot of people are sitting at home right now and very bored. And so they're getting a lot of people to kind of help solve these cases, which is really wonderful. And I think a really wonderful use of the medium. So if you've ever wanted to be an like at-home detective, you should check out some of those podcasts.
I'm muted myself. I'm trying to make it so you guys can see this.
I gave up. I was trying. I don't know if I should like put it on the wall.
Without moving.
Here, I can give updates.
Oh, nice.
I did a shadow.
Oh,
yeah, been working on the pot.
Yeah, I'll try and pull you over here a little bit. I have the both screens plugged in, so I can't like just move you over here, but there we go. And so it's a little floppy. I mean, this is how I work though, and I'm sure this horrifies people, but staring at people, but I kind of just do it. I don't ever put any supports in there, and I don't wait until it's as dry as it ought to be, and I don't slip and score, and I do all the things that you really probably oughtn't do, and it just works out. Don't do that. I mean, like, follow the rules and stuff, but it just works out. Also, like, it helps. I make sculptural work. Like, I don't do this when I'm making pots. It helps when you're making sculptural work because it doesn't have to be functional. You can epoxy it. It's fine. So there you go. Epoxy is your friend. There's an artist who I love, Christina Cordova, and she's out in North Carolina, and her work is just these beautiful figurative pieces that I could never dream to make, and they are incredible. And I was super lucky. I got to go to her studio once because she lives up by Penland, and I walked into her studio, and you walk in, and the first thing you see is this like floor to ceiling cart that's like as wide as probably like as long as my house, honestly. And it's all epoxy. She was like, epoxy, like talking about best tools in the studio. She's like, epoxy is my favorite tool. She's like, some of my pieces are mostly epoxy. And I was like, oh my gosh, life-changing. Totally life-changing. You can just epoxy things. But not on functional pots, so
that's the kicker. I think that's kind of, where you got that from, probably.
Possibly, yeah. But I do follow more rules when I make functional pots, but I also don't make things that are this big when I make functional pots. I made some cool things. I should show you all. Where would I put them? They're in one of these things. Oh, here. some pots that I was gonna show, but they're not glazed. So I can't really do them, but I can show you guys. Oh, I like this one. This one's one that I really like. Yeah, this one. And these are all Sige. But I actually have like 20 pots done that I was going to show. And these are all made, and I Siged the bottom. They're all made with like a little foot mold, because I don't like making feet. I made a mold. And the whole thing is tear Sige. So you can see a little bit, it's hard to come off on camera, but you can see a little bit of the like waxy sheen that I was talking about earlier. And then this part is the same, but I didn't buff it, so it's less waxy. You get a little bit, and then there'll be like a really bright colored glaze on the inside. So nice. At some point, I'll probably put them online. What else am I going to do with them?
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, and I like decorating the bottoms. These guys don't have any Sige, so these guys will just be like single color. But anyway, there's things.
Very nice.
This is also how I make my molds for like hand-built pots. I make them out of coils. I do bisque molds, and I'll just kind of come up with a rough shape that I want and make a big coil, and then kind of pinch it and cut a flat edge around the bottom and pinch it so you can get that nice pinched bottom. And I have some. I'll show you because that didn't make any sense at all, especially if you're not a potter. That didn't make any sense. Oh yeah, double bucket of molds. So yeah, it's just a coil, pinched, cut off at the bottom. And
that's simple.
Yeah, they're great. And I got this one that's like simple foot, and then it makes a scalloped rim on the pot. They're all for like T-bowl kinds of things. And then this one has like the more simple rim with the scalloped foot. So anyway, if you hate making feet, there's a thing to do. I love pinching. So you got more questions?
What's your dog's name? And
Peyton. Hi, Peyton. That's my baby brother. We have food grade epoxy, functional. Heck yes. I will take some of that. The dog's name is Bean. She's amazing. She's really upset because earlier during the stream, I had to bring her inside because she went outside and barked at the neighbor. So she's very upset that she's not getting to enjoy the goodness of the weather. She's a princess, though.
She's the best dog.
She's so cute. She's so cute.
Very cute.
What is the name? No more questions. It is your fur niece. Are my actual nieces and nephews on here? They probably are since Peyton is. Hey, Maura, Bastion, Lindley, I love you. And Kesley, if Kesley's watching. I don't know if Kesley's watching, but if she is, hi, I love you too. Cool. Oh, so how big is this woodcut you're gonna make?
Well, I'm not sure. I think, honestly, like, what is this size? So 11 by 14 is the size of this sheet of paper. It seems pretty nice. Might make it a little smaller, just because I can. Hey, Callie. Oh, so Caleb's talking. So Caleb just said, hey, Callie, I found it really interesting in how you use your work to restore visibility between nature landscapes and human landscapes, which are often perceived as be binary. I was wondering if you could talk about erasure in your work, and it seems like it's an important aspect to how you restore visibility. Yes, so a lot of my work in my during grad school was talking about kind of how we see the world. And I was talking about this a little bit at the beginning of when I was talking about my artwork, but how we see the world is constantly changing. And I think we learned that a lot from John Gerizzo's drawing classes and drawing from life and going to Art in the Wild. So at Northwest College, we were able to go on this class that took us up into the mountains, and we would go and draw, and it was really wonderful. But if anybody's drawn in nature, you know how quickly everything changes. So the light changes, or because a cloud went across the sun, or the sun setting, or a storm's coming in, or atmosphere changes and different things. And so how we see the world is always in movement and changes. And so I love having things hidden. So I like having things very visible, and then having another print where it's almost not there, because then you, from the piece that's visible, you know it's a bird or whatever I'm doing. And then the piece next to it, you assume it's that same thing. And I do a lot with keeping things hidden. So some of the pieces on my website from my MFA, you wouldn't know this unless you saw it in person. And even then you may not even be able to touch it. But a lot of the pieces actually had like multiple prints behind them, so they're hidden. And I'm not exactly sure what all that's about, and I'm still kind of thinking a lot about it. But with the work in the show right now, with having these human elements that are there, but either cutting away or erasing them from our visibility, it's just kind of my experience of walking out in nature and not wanting to see human elements. I just want to be out in nature, but then also kind of coming to terms with the fact that it's there. And also it's still interesting, I think, having kind of like, I've been looking at these, I don't know if they're water tanks or different things that are kind of out in the landscape. They're still kind of really interesting, and to ignore them or erase them would kind of take away from that landscape as well. But yeah.
Super interesting. So thinking about doing shows like this in the future, I guess, like, because I've seen those pieces with lots of layers in the background, and they're so different online as to in person. Oh, it's 8. Everybody's howling. Oh wait, no, it's not 8. It's almost 9. Why are they howling an hour late?
It's almost 9. We've got just a few more minutes.
Everybody's howling an hour late. I don't know. I think it's super interesting because your work has so much to do with movement, and like you see the movement within the repetition and the lines and things, but when you see the work in person, like the work moves, and and the light moves, and the ways that you display it. There's usually light and windows and all of that moves, and like how. So we're thinking about like bringing more things to the online space. Like how would you communicate those?
Oh man, yeah, I don't know. And I was kind of thinking a lot about it when we were first kind of thinking about, actually, I might have an answer to this question. So I was thinking a lot about it when I was photographing my work and wondering if I could like really play around with that. And when I was photographing my work, Bob was over, and there's some pieces that are really heavily embossed. And one of the best ways to photograph pieces that are embossed like that is to have really strong light rake across them. Okay. And I was photographing them, but the prints were a little warped, and they created almost like mountains or like hills from the shadows. Mm-hmm. And so it's like this kind of ephemeral thing of this shadow that's being created by the print. And so we're playing around and moving the prints around, and I'm taking pictures with the shadows kind of, being part of it. And I was kind of thinking of using that as the piece, but it didn't look, I needed more time to kind of figure it out. So I think I would play around with things like that. And maybe not so much of it, I guess it would be more ephemeral, like how things are changing in the movement. So maybe playing with medium that you don't always get to play with in a gallery, but you can photograph. Yeah.
friend and I were talking today. I have a friend who I work with who's an animator, and we were talking today about the cut paper stuff that I was doing, and she's got a friend who animates cut paper. Oh my gosh. Like, yeah. This where it's like, that's a medium that you can use. Oh my God. Like,
there's historic ones too. There's some old films of cut paper animation.
It's so
Your
funny.
brother has a question.
What's that?
Oh, go ahead.
Oh no.
Your brother has a question for us.
What? Current styles, both it's evolved a lot over 10 years. I love that you've known us both the whole time. I mean, obviously you've known me, but you've seen all the work. You make your work now. Okay, so Pate says, so I'm pretty late, but can you guys talk about your transitioning to your current styles? Both of your work has evolved a lot over 10 years. Were there any major stimuli that drew you to how you make your work now, whether mentors or events?
So yeah. Do you want to go first, Cal?
Oh, yes. Responding to Aaron. Okay. Evolved. Where? Oh, yeah. I mean, mine would just be the same that I've been saying. Definitely the professors that I've worked with, but my body of work right now is very, very much derived from the faculty that I worked with in grad school and helping me find how I wanted to work and what I like doing and all of that. But I think also right now, it's such a subtle change how I was working in grad school to how I'm working now, but I do think it is a change. But I think working in a different studio and like even before we had to isolate, just going from one studio to another can change your artwork, which is crazy. You think that you know exactly how to do something, and then you go into a new studio and nothing works, and you have different ink and you have different ways of doing things. And for me, the press has different pressure and you have to figure it out. So that can always change your work because you're problem solving and adjusting, but sometimes you're making, mistakes because it's not working out. And then you see, oh, that's really cool. I want to continue doing that. And then also grad school, I had to stay so focused. I had to just work and work and work. I never really had time to play. And so the work that I'm making right now is just like allowing me to kind of play and almost resort back to where I was at Northwest, which is kind of funny because I was printing at Northwest again. But just being allowed to play and just make a bunch of work, and I'm not worried about passing my MFA orals, which is awesome.
Right? Oh my God. Yeah, I'm feeling that way too because about you were saying about the playing and I won't tell the archaeology story again because you've heard it 10,000 times and you were like there when I came home, so it's fine. But like a lot of my influence in my work, like the work has changed, but a lot of it goes back to archaeology and artifacts and like finding those things. And I feel like I'm still making those. But as far as like the way that I approach making and like the way that I'm approaching, especially right now, like I've made work in so long. And when I owned the studio down in Taos, like that was my livelihood, not necessarily my work, but like teaching ceramics and bringing people in to learn ceramics and like managing the gallery and all of that, like that. A lot of the play went away because that was the only way I was making money, and I had employees and I had to pay them. And so I like was doing the things and I was enjoying the things, and I do love to teach and all of that, but so much it was just like I have to figure out a way to pay the bills for another month and pay all these people for another month. And so like I did not find any play in any of that. And even when I would try to make work on my own, I just didn't have it in me. And now being in a totally different like creative mindset, like where my job is all online. I work with people who are making YouTube videos and podcasts and cool creative art that way. And so I've got space again in my mind for play in my art. And that's really like where my whole focus is right now, rather than concept. Like there are concepts that are in the work and that have always been in the work, but like mostly I really disliked making work for such a long time, and that is really heartbreaking because it's been such a big part of my life. And so like I'm mostly just giving myself the space to play and not be freaked out by that. So we'll see. I'm making a lot of stuff that I made 10 years ago. I'm just seeing how I make it now and how different my hands are. Because I made this piece when I was in college. And it wasn't very good. So we'll see if it's better now.
Well, it's 9 o'clock. Should we?
So yeah, you guys will have a second delay. But thank you so very much for everybody who showed up and watched part of it or all of it or everything. This was a really cool way to do a reception. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
And we, if you miss it, Callie and I will be doing demos. So we're going to finish these pieces so that we can auction them off. And so we will be doing, I don't know who's first, but one of us will be doing a demo on May 16th, and one of us will be doing a demo on May 30th. I think those are the right dates. It's a Saturday. And you can find info of that on the Gestalt website. And that will all be good.
And come with questions again. And I think in these ones, we'll be even more able to talk about our process. I definitely will be. I feel like I can't talk too much about something that's really hard to see. But yeah, come with questions, and we'll be really excited to answer anything you have to ask.
Yeah, we're super stoked, and I'm excited to sit on each other's too. It's been such a long time since I've actually seen you make work, so it's going to be grand.
Yeah.
But yeah, we'll see you on the 16th and the 30th, and hopefully this video will be on the Gestalt YouTube channel, barring any technical difficulties. So if you missed any of it, you can go back and watch it if you'd like to. And you guys are amazing. I'm so very grateful that we got to do this. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah. And thank you so much, Erin. Again, this was such a new thing for everybody, and it really took a lot of problem solving, and I'm so happy that it worked out and that we're able to share everything with you all. And we miss everybody. And it's really great to hear from people that we haven't been able to talk to in so long. So
yeah,
really wonderful.
for sure.
Yeah, and,
thanks everybody.
And if you don't know, you can go onto our onto the website, and you can comment below our images, and those are really wonderful. So please go on there and comment. It's like our guest book. So if you have any comments that you want to make on the show, or if you have any questions for us, we're keeping an eye on it, and you can ask them there. So
you can also ask us questions on each of our Instagrams. We're both on Instagram. Callie's got a website. You can probably contact her there. I don't, so Instagram is a good place. And assuming that this video is on the website, you'll be able to leave comments on the video, and we'll take a look at that until the show's down. Probably not forever, but at least until the show's down. Awesome.
All right.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.